Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto saved Vivi from Crocodile and became the king of Alabasta by marriage. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Stormbreaker. The first thing he knew was heat. A dry, suffocating heat that felt nothing like the damp earth of Konoha or the cool air of Mount Myaboku. It was an oppressive, alien warmth that baked the very breath in his lungs. Naruto Uzumaki's eyes cracked open, the lids heavy as stone. Blue, a searing, endless blue, was all he saw above him. A sky with no clouds, no birds, no familiar shape of home. He pushed himself up, his palms sinking into fine, pale gold sand that shifted like liquid silk. Sand. It was everywhere. Dunes rolled away in every direction, silent, monolithic waves frozen under the glare of a white-hot sun he didn't recognize. His black and orange jacket felt heavy, wrong. The air was thin, stripped of the vibrant life energy he was so used to breathing. He closed his eyes, extending his senses not with his sight, but with the core of his being. Silence. It was the most profound silence he had ever felt. The world around him was not just quiet, it was dead. The natural energy that flowed through trees, rivers, and living creatures, the very essence he drew upon for sage mode, was so faint here it was like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane. It was there, a thready, desperate pulse deep beneath the earth, but on the surface, there was only a void. He felt a pang of dislocation so sharp it was almost a physical blow. The connection to his own world, to the sage toads, to the accumulated history of his homeland, was gone. Severed. He was an island, adrift in an ocean of nothingness. He stood, dusting sand from trousers he hadn't worn in what felt like a lifetime. The war was over. Sasuke was back. Peace, a fragile, hard-won peace, had been achieved. He remembered a light, a tearing sensation, a feeling of being pulled through a pinhole in reality during a final, chaotic skirmish with a remnant of Kagaya's will. And then, this. There was no panic. The boy who would have screamed and flailed was long gone, replaced by the man who had faced gods and monsters. He simply assessed. He was alone. He was in an unknown land. He was at his peak, the golden light of the six paths humming just beneath his skin, a reservoir of power that felt almost sacrilegious in this barren wasteland. He had to move. Direction was meaningless here, so he picked one and began to walk. His steps were light, his feet barely disturbing the sand. The sun beat down, a physical weight on his shoulders, but it did not tire him. He walked for what could have been an hour or a day. Time had lost its anchor. The landscape was a hypnotizing, repeating pattern of gold and shadow. He saw the bleached skeletons of strange, massive creatures, their ribcages arching out of the sand like the hulls of forgotten ships. This place hadn't just died. It had been murdered by thirst. He needed information. A purpose. He paused, settling cross-legged atop a towering dune. Closing his eyes, he drew on the faint, stubborn pulse of the world's natural energy. It was a struggle, like trying to start a fire with damp wood, but he was the greatest sage of his time. Slowly, painstakingly, he filtered out the oppressive silence and the roar of the wind. He listened. And then he found it. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a cacophony of emotion broadcast on a frequency only he could perceive. It was a tidal wave of desperation, rage, and sorrow, so vast it was like an entire nation was screaming at once. It crashed against his senses, a raw, unfiltered agony. But within that maelstrom, he sensed something else. A single point of light. A flicker of hope so ferociously stubborn it refused to be extinguished. It was a will of iron, a conviction that burned brighter than all the despair around it. That was a voice he understood. He stood up, his own purpose solidifying. He didn't know who was fighting, or why. He only knew that someone was holding on against impossible odds, and that was a cause he would always answer. He pinpointed the direction of the feeling, the epicenter of the pain and the heart of that stubborn light. He vanished. He didn't run. He simply moved, a golden blur streaking across the desert, leaving no footprints in his wake. The world became a smear of yellow and blue. Dunes that would have taken a man days to cross past in a blink. The feeling grew stronger, the psychic scream of a city tearing itself apart. He could smell it now, even over the sterile scent of the sand, the coppery tang of blood, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the thick, choking dust of crumbling stone. He slowed as he crested the final dune, his eyes falling upon a sight of organized chaos. A massive city, built of white stone and elegant spires, was burning. A great wall surrounded it, but the battle was inside, concentrated in a vast central plaza. Two armies clashed below. One was a disciplined force in gleaming armor, the Royal Guard, fighting with a desperate, last-stand ferocity. The other was a ragged but enormous mass of civilians, a rebellion fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. They were fighting each other. Brother against brother, while a third, shadowy group of strange and garishly dressed individuals seemed to be manipulating the conflict from the sidelines. At the very center of it all, on the steps of a grand palace, the drama reached its zenith. Naruto's eyes, honed by 1,000 battles, took it all in at a glance. A colossal man with a hook for a hand stood with an air of absolute, reptilian arrogance. He was made of sand, his very body shifting and reforming, untouchable. Before him, on her knees, was the source of that stubborn light. A young woman with blue hair, her white clothes torn and stained with dirt and blood. She wasn't crying. Her jaw was set, her eyes burning with a defiant fire that Naruto recognized instantly. It was the same fire he'd seen in Old Man Hokage, in Tsunade, in himself. The will of fire, transplanted into a foreign soul. Around them, her companions lay broken. A boy in a straw hat, whose energy felt strangely elastic and boundless, was half buried in the sand, unconscious. A swordsman with green hair was down, as were a long-nosed boy and a man in a neat black suit. They had fought hard. They had lost. "It's over, Princess Vivi," the Sandman rasped, his voice a dry rustle of grit and malice. He gestured with his golden hook toward the chaos in the plaza. "Your rebellion has failed. Your royal guards have failed. Your little pirate friends have failed. This country is mine. Its water, its people, its future. All of it." The princess, Vivi, pushed herself up, swaying on her feet. You will never have the heart of this country, Crocodile," she yelled, her voice raw but unbroken. "Even if you kill us all, the spirit of Alabasta will never belong to you." Crocodile chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Spirit doesn't fill empty wells, princess." He raised his hook, its polished surface gleaming in the sun. "A shame. You have spirit. But it's time to put you out of your misery." Naruto felt a shift in the air. This was it. The final moment. The flicker of hope was about to be snuffed out. He didn't announce his presence. He didn't shout a challenge. He was simply there. He took one step off the dune, landing on the stone plaza below. The ground where his foot touched didn't crack or shatter. There was no sound at all. But the entire plaza seemed to still for a heartbeat. The wind died. The dust settled. The screams caught in 100 throats. Every combatant, from the lowest rebel to Crocodile himself, froze, their heads turning to the source of the sudden, immense pressure that had just descended upon them. Naruto stood between the fallen straw hat boy and the palace steps, his hands in his pockets. His expression was calm, his blue eyes holding a clarity that cut through the haze of battle. He wasn't looking at the armies or the destruction. He was looking only at Crocodile. Crocodile lowered his hook, his brow furrowing. He hadn't sensed this newcomer's approach. No one had. It was as if he had materialized from the very air. "And who are you?" he sneered, irritation coloring his tone. "Another insect, come to be crushed." Naruto ignored him. His gaze shifted to the blue-haired princess. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. A silent acknowledgement. "I heard you." Vivi stared back, her defiance momentarily replaced by utter confusion. This man, he wasn't a rebel. He wasn't a royal guard. His clothes were strange, his hair the color of the sun, and the power radiating from him was a tangible thing, a quiet hum that made the hairs on her arms stand up. It wasn't threatening. It was absolute. "I am not in a patient mood today, boy," Crocodile growled, his body beginning to dissolve into a vortex of sand. "Get out of my way or be erased." The sand swirled, forming a sharp, cutting blade that he launched directly at Naruto's heart. Desert Spada. Naruto didn't move a muscle. He simply watched the blade of sand approach. Just as it was about to touch his chest, it stopped. The sand lost all momentum, hovering a mere inch from his jacket before collapsing into a harmless pile at his feet. A collective gasp went through the plaza. Crocodile's eyes widened. Impossible. No one could just stop his attack. "What? You're the one causing all this, then," Naruto said, his voice level, devoid of anger but carrying an undeniable weight. He pulled one hand from his pocket. "Hurting people. Drying up a whole country. All for, what? A throne?" He finally looked Crocodile in the eye. "That's a pretty stupid reason to make a girl like her cry. You dare." Crocodile roared, his composure finally cracking. The ground beneath Naruto erupted as a massive wave of sand, sharp as glass, surged upward to swallow him. Desert Girasol. Naruto didn't leap away. He stomped his foot. Once. A shockwave of pure, golden energy erupted from him, not chakra as his world knew it, but something more fundamental. The surging sand wave was vaporized, blown back into a cloud of inert dust. The shockwave continued, washing over the entire plaza. It didn't harm anyone, but every single person, rebel and royalist alike, was thrown off their feet by the sheer force of his will. They landed in a heap, their weapons scattered, the fight knocked clean out of them. Only Crocodile, Vivi, and Naruto remained standing. Crocodile stared, his mouth agape. His Suna no Mi, his Logia power, had been utterly negated. Not by water. Not by hockey. By nothing. By a stomp of a foot. What are you?" the warlord whispered, a sliver of genuine fear entering his voice for the first time in decades. Naruto closed his eyes. The world fell away, and he sank into the calm of sage mode. He felt the dry, brittle nature of Crocodile's body, a being of sand held together by will. He felt the weakness, the inherent law of this world that even a power like this one had to obey. Sand, when wet, becomes mud. It loses its cohesion, its ability to flow and separate. He also felt the air. It was scorchingly dry, but it wasn't empty. Molecules of water, H2O, were still there, scattered and sparse, but present. And deep, deep beneath the palace, he felt a vast, slumbering aquifer. A sea of life, imprisoned by the drought. He had all he needed. He opened his eyes, the golden pigment of the sage now ringing his irises. It's over. He brought his right hand up, palm open. A vortex of wind, small at first, began to spin above it. It was a Rasengan, but it was different. It wasn't just his chakra. He was pulling at the world around him. The air began to rush towards his palm, and as it did, he used his sage's control over natural energy to force a change. He pulled on the very molecules of water. Drawing them out of the air, compressing them, weaving them into the spiraling sphere. The Rasengan grew, and its color shifted. It was no longer a simple blue of chakra. It became a churning, violent orb of crystalline water, a miniature typhoon held in the palm of his hand. Droplets of water flew from it, sizzling on the hot stone. The air around them grew heavy, humid. Vivi stared, mesmerized. Water. He was creating water from thin air. Crocodile saw it too, and his fear turned to primal terror. That sphere, it was his undoing. It was death. He lost all composure, his body dissolving into a massive tsunami of sand that surged toward Naruto, not to attack, but to flee. "I won't let you," Naruto said, his voice a promise. He vanished again. He reappeared directly in the path of the fleeing sand cloud, his arm cocked back. He didn't need to find Crocodile's real body. The water would do that for him. Sage Art, Maelstrom Rasengan. He thrust his hand forward, driving the churning sphere of water and wind directly into the center of the sand tsunami. The impact was not an explosion. It was an absorption. The moment the Rasengan made contact, the hyper-concentrated water was unleashed. It saturated the sand in an instant, turning the entire cloud of what was once a warlord into a sloshing, heavy mass of mud. Crocodile's consciousness, trapped within, tried to reform, but he couldn't. His grains of sand were too heavy, too clumped. He was solid. He was vulnerable. And he was trapped in the heart of a grinder. The rotational power of the Rasengan, no longer needing to contain the water, tore through the mud, a devastating vortex of force that ripped him apart from the inside out. There was a final, choked scream, a sound of disbelief and agony, and then Crocodile, the warlord of the sea, the hero of Alabasta, the secret leader of Baroque works, was gone. A torrent of wet sand and mud splattered across the palace steps, formless, lifeless. The golden hook clattered to the ground, the last remnant of his reign. Silence returned to the plaza. A heavy, stunned silence. Naruto stood over the muddy remains, his hands still extended, the golden glow in his eyes slowly fading. He took a deep breath. Then he looked up at the clock tower. His sage senses were screaming at him. A secondary threat. A massive concentration of explosive power, set to detonate in less than a minute. He didn't hesitate. He created a single shadow clone without a hand sign. "Deal with it," he said. The clone nodded, glancing at the tower. "Got it, boss." It crouched, and then shot upwards like a cannonball, a yellow streak that scaled the tower in 2 seconds. A moment later, the clone reappeared in the sky high above the city, holding a massive black sphere, the bomb. With a mighty heave, the clone hurled it straight up into the heavens. The bomb detonated miles above the city, a silent, brilliant flash of light, its concussive force dissipated harmlessly in the upper atmosphere. The clone vanished in a puff of smoke. Down below, Naruto lowered his arm. The job was done. The enemy was defeated. The immediate danger was averted. The people were safe. And then, he felt it. A single drop of water on his cheek. He looked up. So did Vivi. So did every man and woman in the plaza. From the cloudless, merciless sky, a second drop fell. Then a third. Then a dozen. Within seconds, a gentle rain began to fall upon the city of Alabasta. It wasn't the false rain of dance powder. This was real. Cool, clean, life-giving rain. The drought that had plagued the kingdom for years, the drought that had been the heart of all this pain and conflict, was over. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The rebels and the royal guard simply stood, or sat, or lay on the ground, letting the rain wash the blood and the dust from their faces. They stared, all of them, at the blonde-haired stranger standing in the center of the plaza. He hadn't just defeated a warlord. He had broken the sky. He had commanded the heavens. Vivi stumbled forward, her legs barely holding her. She stopped a few feet from him, her blue eyes wide with 1,000 questions. Gratitude, awe, and a sliver of fear all mingled in her gaze. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? Naruto looked at her, then at the rain-soaked people, and finally at the sky. A genuine, small smile touched his lips for the first time since he'd arrived in this world. The rain felt good. It felt like a promise. For the first time, this dead world felt just a little bit alive. He had saved them. He had brought the storm. But as he stood there, a god in the eyes of a broken nation, he had never felt more alone. Chapter 2, The Weight of a Foreign Crown. The rain fell. It was a soft, percussive rhythm against the stone, a gentle hiss across the sand. For the people of Alabasta, it was the sound of a miracle. Men and women who had been trying to kill each other moments before now sat in the mud, their faces tilted to the sky, letting the impossible coolness wash over them. Tears mingled with the raindrops, carving clean paths through the grime on their cheeks. The fire of their rage, stoked for years by dust and desperation, had been doused in an instant. Naruto stood in the center of it all, a still point in the turning world. The immense power he had unleashed receded, sinking back beneath his skin, leaving only the quiet hum of the sage. He felt the collective shock, the awe, the burgeoning, terrifying hope being directed at him. It was a heavy thing, the faith of a nation. He had felt it once before, after his battle with pain, but this was different. This wasn't his home. These weren't his people. And yet, the relief that washed through them felt just as profound. A groan from nearby pulled his attention. The boy in the straw hat was stirring, pushing himself out of the shallow crater of sand Crocodile had buried him in. He sputtered, shaking his head like a wet dog. Man, what a punch, he grumbled, before his eyes landed on Naruto. They went wide. Whoa. Hey. You're not Crocodile. Where'd he go? Did you beat him? He scrambled to his feet, his energy returning with a bizarre, rubbery vitality. You're the one who made it rain. That was awesome. What's your name? Wanna join my crew? The questions came in a rapid-fire barrage, full of an uncomplicated enthusiasm that was almost jarring. Before Naruto could answer, the rest of the crew was coming to. The green-haired swordsman pushed himself up, his 3 blades clutched tight. His eyes, sharp and analytical, swept over the scene, Crocodile's muddy remains, the fallen bomb tower, the rain, and finally, Naruto. He didn't speak, but his gaze held a deep, grudging respect. The man in the black suit adjusted his tie, brushing himself off with a composure that defied his injuries, a small, thoughtful frown on his face. It was Vivi who finally found her voice. She walked toward Naruto, her steps no longer stumbling but deliberate. The awe was still in her eyes, but it was now tempered with the resolve of a leader. Thank you, she said, the words simple but carrying the weight of her entire kingdom. You saved us. You saved Alabasta. Naruto offered her a small, tired smile. He was making you upset, he said, as if that explained everything. Just then, 2 figures soared down from the palace roof, landing with practiced grace. One was a man with the head of a falcon, the other a man with the head of a jackal. Pell and Shaka, the 2 head guards of the kingdom, their bodies bruised and battered but their loyalty unshaken. They immediately placed themselves between Vivi and Naruto, their weapons drawn, their expressions a mixture of fierce protection and utter confusion. Princess, get back. Pell commanded, his eyes locked on Naruto. We don't know who, or what, he is. Stand down, Pell, Vivi ordered, her voice ringing with newfound authority. She placed a hand on his shoulder. He is the one who ended it. He is our savior. Pell and Shaka exchanged a look of disbelief but reluctantly lowered their weapons. The entire plaza was now a strange tableau, a defeated rebellion, a victorious guard, a group of battered pirates, and one blonde stranger who felt like the eye of a storm. The straw hat boy, Luffy, bounced on the balls of his feet. So, are you gonna join? He asked again, completely ignoring the tension. Naruto looked from the earnest pirate captain to the weary princess. He saw two paths diverging. One led back to the sea, to adventure and freedom. The other led into the heart of this broken, healing kingdom. He felt the faint echo of his own past, the loneliness of being the outcast, the Jinchuriki, and the weight of being the hero. I don't think so, Naruto said, his gaze settling on Vivi. I think I might have found something to do here. Luffy pouted for a second, then broke into a wide grin. Oh, okay. Well, if you ever change your mind, just shout for the king of the pirates. He turned to Vivi, his expression softening. Vivi, you're not coming with us either, are you? Vivi looked at her people, at the rain, at the palace that was her birthright and her burden. A sad smile touched her lips. I can't. They need me. This is my home. The farewell was quick and heartfelt. It wasn't a tearful goodbye, but a parting of comrades who understood their duties. Nami, the crew's navigator, gave Vivi an eternal pose for Alabasta, a keepsake of their journey. Sanji, the cook, gave a dramatic, heartbroken bow. Zoro simply grunted a farewell, a sign of his deepest respect. Luffy stretched his arm, wrapping it around Vivi and Naruto both in a sudden, tight hug. Take care of her, spiky hair, he said, his voice serious for once. I will, Naruto promised. And then, they were gone, running toward the coast, their laughter and energy a stark contrast to the somber quiet of the city. As their presence faded, a new, heavier silence settled over the plaza. The rain was beginning to lighten. The first stage was over. Now, the rebuilding had to begin. Inside the royal palace of Alabasta, the air was thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and old stone. King Nefertari Cobra sat propped up in his grand bed, his body frail and bandaged, but his eyes as sharp as a hawk's. He had listened, silent and unmoving, as Vivi recounted the entire story, from the first appearance of the blonde stranger to the final, impossible defeat of Crocodile and the coming of the rain. Hell, Shaka, and his most trusted advisor, Igaram, stood by, their faces etched with disbelief. He created water from thin air, Vivi finished, her hands clasped before her. And with a stomp of his foot, he disarmed an entire army. I've never seen anything like it, father. Cobra looked at his daughter, truly looked at her. The girl who had left on a desperate mission was gone. In her place was a queen, her spirit forged in the fires of rebellion and loss. He then turned his gaze to the man she had brought with her. Naruto stood quietly by the large window, looking out over the city as the last of the rain clouds drifted away, revealing a sky scrubbed clean. He wasn't looking at the king or listening to their conversation. He seemed lost in thought, a solitary figure radiating a power so immense it felt like a second sun had risen in the room. And he is here now, Cobra said, his voice a dry rasp. This. Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto turned from the window, his blue eyes meeting the king's. There was no arrogance in his posture, no demand. He was simply waiting. You have my eternal gratitude, Naruto Uzumaki, Cobra said, inclining his head as much as his injuries would allow. You have done for Alabasta what our own armies, and even the world government, could not. There is no reward I can offer that would be sufficient. I don't need a reward, Naruto said simply. I just saw someone who needed help. He walked closer to the bed, his presence filling the room. But your kingdom is still hurting. The fighting is over, but the wounds are deep. Rebuilding this will be harder than any fight. Vivi stepped forward, her heart pounding. This was the moment. That's why I wanted to ask you to stay, she said, her voice trembling slightly. We need you. I need you. Not just your strength, but your hope. You showed my people that the impossible can happen. To have you here, helping us rebuild, would be a symbol that a new day has truly come for Alabasta. She looked at him, her plea laid bare. It wasn't just a political request. It was personal. She was asking him to share her burden. Naruto looked into her eyes and saw the crushing weight of the crown she was about to inherit. He saw the loneliness of a leader who had to be strong for everyone. And in that, he saw a reflection of himself. He had achieved the peace he had always dreamed of, but in doing so, he had become a living legend, a figure set apart from everyone else. He was the hero, the savior, but who was he, Naruto, now that the fighting was done? This world was foreign, but the feeling of being needed, of having a tangible purpose, was intimately familiar. Here, he wouldn't be a relic of a past war. He could be a founder of a new peace. "All right," he said, a genuine warmth spreading across his face. "I'll stay. We'll rebuild it together." A wave of relief so profound it was dizzying washed over Vivi. She smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up the entire room. King Cobra let out a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The peace lasted for 3 days. It was a strange, fragile peace. Naruto, using hundreds of shadow clones, began coordinating the initial cleanup of Alabasta. The sight of 1,000 identical men working in perfect unison to clear rubble, repair buildings, and distribute food and water was a shock to the Alabastan people, but they quickly accepted it. This was the man who had brought the rain. Miracles were now simply a part of his nature. He worked with Vivi from dawn until dusk, their partnership falling into a natural rhythm. She was the mind and the heart, directing the efforts, speaking to the people, healing the political rifts. He was the muscle, the unstoppable engine of reconstruction, making years of work happen in a matter of hours. They were in the middle of a planning session in the royal library, maps spread out across a massive table, when a breathless royal guard burst in. "Your Highness! Your Majesty! A fleet has been spotted off the coast. They're flying the flag of the world government." Vivi's blood ran cold. The Marines. Of course. The fall of a warlord would not go unnoticed. Cobra, who had been wheeled into the library to oversee their work, gripped the arm of his chair. "How many ships?" he asked, his voice grim. "A full Buster Call fleet, Your Majesty," the guard stammered. 10 battleships. And they are led by the flagship of Vice Admiral Kaito. A chill went through the room. A Buster Call was a force of absolute annihilation. And Vice Admiral Kaito, known as the Seafoam Blade, was no common brute. He was one of the Navy's most brilliant strategic minds, a man known for his cold, unyielding adherence to the principles of absolute justice. Naruto looked up from the map, his expression unreadable. "Stay here," he said to Vivi, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll go meet them." He walked out of the library, not towards the palace exit, but towards the grand balcony overlooking the capital. Pell and Shaka fell into step behind him. "Lord Naruto, you can't face them alone." Shaka insisted. "This isn't a fight," Naruto said without looking back. "It's a conversation. And I'd rather have it out there than in here." He stepped out onto the balcony, the dry desert wind whipping at his jacket. Below, panic was beginning to spread through the city as the distant shapes of the warships grew larger on the horizon. 10 identical vessels, sleek and menacing, cutting through the water in perfect formation, a symbol of implacable, overwhelming order. Naruto took a deep breath. He didn't want to fight. He was tired of fighting. But he would not allow anyone to threaten this fragile new beginning. He closed his eyes and gathered his power. Not the fiery, explosive might of a tailed beast bomb, but the silent, absolute authority of the 6 paths 9 black spheres, truth-seeking orbs, materialized behind him, hovering in a silent halo. They were his will made manifest, capable of negating any attack, any energy, any ninjutsu. He suspected they would work just as well on whatever this world could throw at him. On the bridge of the lead battleship, Vice Admiral Kaito stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his white marine coat hanging from his shoulders like a cape. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, with sharp features and cold, intelligent gray eyes that missed nothing. He watched the city of Alabasta grow closer through a pair of high-powered binoculars. All ships, halt formation, he commanded, his voice calm and precise. Load all cannons. Target the airspace above the royal palace. Do not fire until ordered. Sir, his subordinate officers chorused, their movements crisp and disciplined. Kaido lowered the binoculars, his gaze fixed on a single, distant point on the palace balcony. A flash of orange and black. Our intelligence was correct, he murmured to himself. The entity that defeated Crocodile is there. He had read the reports from Smoker, from Tashigi, from the shell-shocked agents who had survived the collapse of Baroque works. The stories were fantastical, impossible. A man who moved faster than sight, who created water from nothing, who destroyed a Logia user with a single touch. To the world, Crocodile's defeat was a mystery. To the five elders, it was a terrifying anomaly. And to Kaido, it was a threat to the fundamental balance of global power. An unregistered individual with the power of a god was a rogue variable, a catalyst for chaos. He had to be contained, studied, or, if necessary, eliminated. Fire a warning shot, Kaido ordered. One cannon, port side. Aim 500 meters to the right of the palace. A single cannon roared, launching a cannonball that shrieked through the air. It was a demonstration of intent, a flex of military muscle. On the balcony, Naruto watched the black sphere fly. He didn't flinch. He simply lifted a hand, and one of his truth-seeking orbs detached from its halo. It shot forward, a black dot against the blue sky, moving with impossible speed. It intercepted the cannonball halfway to its target. There was no explosion. The cannonball simply ceased to exist. It touched the black orb and was instantly disintegrated into nothing but dust, which scattered on the wind. On the bridge of the flagship, a stunned silence fell. The officer monitoring the trajectory gasped. Sir, the cannonball, it's gone. It just vanished. Kaido's grip tightened on the railing. He had seen countless devil fruit abilities, mastered hockey to its highest levels, but he had never seen anything like that. A perfect, absolute defense. He's inviting us, Kaido said, a thin, dangerous smile touching his lips. He wants to talk. Very well. He turned to his communications officer. Send a single launch to the shore. I will go myself. Inform the target that Vice Admiral Kaido of Marine Headquarters wishes to have a parley. A few minutes later, Naruto saw a single small boat detach from the lead ship and head for the coast. He turned to Pell and Shaka. He's coming. Tell the king and princess to meet me in the main throne room. And tell everyone to stay calm. He descended into the palace, the 8 remaining orbs swirling silently behind him, a crown of undeniable power. The throne room was cavernous and tense. King Cobra sat on his throne, Vivi at his side. The royal guards lined the walls, their spears held tight. Naruto stood at the bottom of the steps, his arms crossed, waiting. The air was thick with anticipation. The great doors opened, and Vice Admiral Kaido strode in. He was flanked by 2 high-ranking Marines, but he was clearly the center of gravity. He walked with a smooth, predatory grace, his cold eyes taking in everything, the wounded king, the defiant princess, and finally, the blonde man at the foot of the throne. He stopped 20 feet from Naruto. His gaze was sharp, analytical. He was trying to read him, to understand the source of his power. I am Vice Admiral Kaido of the World Government, he announced, his voice echoing in the hall. I am here to investigate the illegal overthrow of a government-sanctioned Shichibukai, Crocodile. He wasn't overthrown, Naruto stated calmly. He was a criminal who was enslaving a nation. I stopped him. You are an unregistered individual who has demonstrated a capacity for destruction on a scale that threatens global security, Kaido countered, his voice like chipping ice. By the authority of the 5 elders, you are to surrender yourself into our custody immediately. Come peacefully, and you will not be harmed. A murmur of outrage went through the Alabastan guards. Vivi stepped forward. This man is the hero of Alabasta. You have no authority here. Kaido's gaze flicked to her, dismissive. Princess, this does not concern you. This is a matter of global stability. He looked back at Naruto. Your power is an anomaly. The world cannot tolerate such unknowns. You are a loose cannon, a potential catalyst for endless war. Naruto felt a flash of irritation. He had heard this before. People fearing what they couldn't understand, what they couldn't control. The only thing I've done here is save people. Is that a threat to your stability? Today you saved them, Kaido shot back, his voice hardening. But what about tomorrow? What happens when you decide a different king should rule? Or that a different island deserves more water? Power like yours cannot exist without oversight. It is a corrupting force. Surrender, or we will be forced to pacify this entire area. It was a clear threat. Surrender, or he would order the Buster Call. Naruto's expression didn't change, but the 8 orbs behind him began to drift forward, slowly surrounding him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. You're talking about starting a war with a country you're supposed to protect, just to get to me? Naruto asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Collateral damage is sometimes necessary for the preservation of order, Kaido said coldly. My orders are absolute. He was about to say more, to issue his final ultimatum, but he was cut off by King Cobra. Enough. The king's voice, though weak, boomed with royal authority. He struggled to his feet, leaning on a cane Igaram had provided. All eyes turned to him. Vice Admiral, Cobra said, his gaze like steel. You speak of authority and jurisdiction. Let me remind you that Alabasta is a sovereign nation, a founding member of the world government. You stand on our soil, in our palace, and you threaten our guest. Cobra took a slow, painful step forward. This man, Naruto Uzumaki, did not act as a rogue agent. He acted at the behest of the rightful heir to this throne, Princess Vivi. He stopped a traitor who had infiltrated the very system you represent and brought ruin to my people. His actions were not an attack on stability. They were a restoration of it. He stopped at the top of the steps, looking down at both Kaido and Naruto. His next words would change everything. As of this moment, by royal decree, I, King Nefertari Cobra, bestow upon Naruto Uzumaki the title of Guardian of Alabasta. He is hereby granted diplomatic immunity as a sovereign agent of this kingdom. His power is now Alabasta's power. An attack on him is an act of war against the nation of Alabasta itself. A stunned silence filled the throne room. Kaido's jaw tightened, his cold composure finally showing a crack. This was a political move he had not anticipated. He could not order a Buster Call on a founding kingdom over a diplomatic dispute. It would be an unprecedented political disaster. The 5 elders would have his head. He was checkmated. In the crowd that had gathered outside the palace, a figure in a simple traveler's cloak watched the proceedings from a distance, hidden in the shadows of an alleyway. She was slender, her face obscured by a deep cowl. In her hand, she held a small, black, snail-like creature, a den mushi reserved for the highest echelons of intelligence. It did not make the usual purupuru sound. It was silent. The figure, known only as Strix, had watched everything. She saw the truth-seeking orb negate the cannonball. She had felt the oppressive power emanating from the palace. Her own senses, honed by years of training in the darkest arts of assassination and espionage, told her this was something new. It wasn't hockey. It wasn't a devil fruit. It felt older. More fundamental. She brought the black den mushi to her lips, her voice a soft, toneless whisper. Report to Celestial Command. The anomaly, codenamed Kitsune, has been contained politically by the Alabastan monarchy. Marine engagement is neutralized. She paused, her unseen eyes still fixed on the distant palace. Confirming earlier assessment. The subject's energy signature is off the known spectrum. It is vast, self-sustaining, and has properties consistent with the creation and negation of matter. It feels divine. She listened to the silent response, a psychic impression rather than a sound. Yes, Your Excellencies, she whispered. The profile matches the forbidden texts. A power akin to the gods of the old world. My recommendation is to move from passive observation to active surveillance. This, guardian of Alabasta, may be the catalyst we have feared. Kaito, defeated for the moment, gave a stiff, formal bow to King Cobra. Your Majesty's declaration has been noted, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. He turned his piercing gaze back to Naruto. This is not over. The world government does not forget. He spun on his heel and strode out of the throne room, his authority shattered by a few words from a dying king. Naruto watched him go, then looked up at Cobra, who was swaying, his energy spent. Vivi rushed to his side, helping him back to the throne. He was the guardian of Alabasta. The title felt strange, heavy. A foreign crown on a foreign head. He had come to this world alone and adrift. Now, in a single day, he had gained a home, a purpose, and the enmity of the most powerful organization in the world. He looked at Vivi, at her determined, grateful face. He looked at the guards, who now stared at him not with fear, but with reverence. The weight of their hope, their future, was now formally on his shoulders. It was a heavy burden. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in carrying it. Chapter 3, Whispers in the Oasis. Months passed. The fierce, desperate heat of Alabasta's long drought began to feel like a distant memory, a story told of a darker age. The rains, once a shocking miracle, had settled into a more natural, seasonal pattern. Small, hardy green things began to sprout in the spaces between the dunes, and the great river Sandora, once a dusty scar on the land, now flowed with a steady and reassuring current. The country was breathing again. The heart of this rebirth was the city of Nanohana. Once a quiet port, it now bustled with a life it had never known. The market was a kaleidoscope of color and sound. Merchants who had once sold dusty trinkets and scavenged goods now laid out vibrant textiles, gleaming pottery, and, most wondrous of all, pyramids of fresh fruit. The air, once thick with grit, now carried the sweet scent of sun-ripened dates and the sharp, clean smell of perfume flowers. Vivi moved through the crowd, her royal guards keeping a respectful but watchful distance. She was no longer the desperate princess in torn clothes. She wore a simple but elegant sky-blue dress, her hair tied back, her face relaxed and filled with a light that had been absent for years. She paused at a stall, accepting a date from an old woman whose deeply lined face was split by a joyous, toothless grin. The sweetest harvest in a decade, my queen, the woman said, her voice raspy with emotion. Vivi bit into the fruit, its honeyed sweetness exploding on her tongue. It's wonderful, Eileen, she said, her smile genuine. Truly a blessing. A few feet away, Naruto leaned against a wall, watching her. He had traded his heavy jacket for lighter, locally made clothes, simple black trousers and a loose-fitting, sleeveless orange tunic that left his arms bare. He looked less like a foreign warrior and more like a part of the landscape, albeit a singularly striking one. The awe he once commanded had softened into a deep, abiding affection among the people. They still called him Lord Naruto or the Stormbreaker, but there was a warmth in their voices now, a familiarity. He was no longer just their savior, he was theirs. He saw Vivi laugh at something the old woman said, and a comfortable warmth spread through his chest. Seeing her smile, seeing this whole country come back to life, had become the anchor of his new existence. It filled a void he hadn't known how to name, the yawning emptiness left after the finality of achieving his life's greatest goal in a world he could no longer reach. Enjoying the view? Vivi asked, walking over to him, her eyes sparkling with mirth. Someone has to, he replied, pushing off the wall. If you eat all the dates in the market, it'll cause an economic crisis. She playfully nudged his arm. It's called quality control. A queen's duty. They began to walk, their pace unhurried. The reports from the Katoria aqueduct are good. Hell says the main channel will be finished by the end of the week. My clones are getting pretty good at masonry, Naruto said with a proud smirk. A couple of them are even arguing about the finer points of arch support. I think they're developing personalities. It had become the new normal. Naruto's shadow clones were the engine of Alabasta's reconstruction. Where 1,000 men would have taken a year to build a canal, 1,000 of Naruto's clones, directed by Vivi's meticulous plans and the kingdom's best engineers, could do it in a matter of days. They had rebuilt homes, cleared roads, and erected entire public works with an efficiency that bordered on the divine. It was a sight that never failed to stun outsiders, this army of 1,000 identical blonde men working in silent, perfect unison under the desert sun. Their days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for planning and overseeing the reconstruction, a partnership of her vision and his power. Afternoons were for touring the kingdom, for Vivi to reconnect with her people and for Naruto to understand the land he had sworn to protect. But it was the nights he had come to value most. Later that evening, the grand silence of the royal library enveloped them. The vast chamber, with its towering shelves and scent of old paper, had become their sanctuary. King Cobra, his health still fragile, had retired early, leaving them to their work. Maps were spread across a massive teak table, but the maps had been pushed aside. In their place was a children's primer. Okay, try this one again, Vivi said, pointing to a symbol on the page. It was a swooping, elegant character. Naruto leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a master of sage arts, a warrior who had deciphered the patterns of gods, but the written language of this world was a fortress he was still struggling to breach. It's Kawa, he guessed, the unfamiliar sound clumsy on his tongue. Close, Vivi corrected gently, a small smile playing on her lips. That's Kyumo, for cloud. See the little loop at the top. Kawa is river, it flows straight. She leaned closer, her finger tracing the character. Her hair brushed against his shoulder, and he caught the faint scent of desert roses. Think of it like water moving. He found his attention drifting from the character to the warmth of her presence beside him. In these quiet moments, the queen and the guardian faded away, leaving only Vivi and Naruto. She taught him not just the language, but the world. She would unroll vast sea charts, her fingers tracing the paths of the Grand Line, explaining the four blues, the calm belt, the mysteries of devil fruits, and the monolithic power of the world government and its enigmatic leaders, the five elders. In return, he found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He couldn't tell her the truth, that he was a refugee from another dimension, a ninja who wielded an energy called chakra. The words would be meaningless, insane. So he spoke in truths wrapped in metaphor. I had a dream, once, he told her one night, his eyes distant as he stared at a map of the world. To become the leader of my village. The Hokage. He stumbled over the unfamiliar, yet deeply ingrained word, quickly correcting himself. Their chief. Their king. It wasn't about power. It was about getting everyone to acknowledge me. To see me. Vivi listened, her chin propped on her hand, her full attention on him. She heard the echo of loneliness in his voice. Why wouldn't they see you? He hesitated. How could he explain being a Jinchuriki? There was something inside me. A power that people were afraid of. It wasn't my fault, but I was born with it. It made me an outcast. I was alone for a long time. He looked at her, his blue eyes holding a deep, ancient pain. I know what it's like to have people look at you and see a monster, or a weapon, instead of a person. Her expression softened with a profound empathy that went beyond simple pity. She, who had seen her own people twisted by lies and fear, could understand that isolation. But you changed their minds, she said, her voice a soft certainty. You became their hero. It took a lot of fighting, he admitted, a wry smile touching his lips. And I had to bring back a friend who lost his way. He was like a brother to me, but he chose a path of darkness and power. I made a promise I would bring him back, no matter what. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do. He didn't mention the names Sasuke or Sakura, but their ghosts filled the space between his words. In sharing these sanitized fragments of his past, he was giving her the pieces of his soul. He was showing her the boy who had clawed his way out of loneliness, the man who understood the weight of a promise. And she, in turn, saw past the godlike savior who had fallen from the sky. She saw the man, with his own scars and his own quiet sorrows. Their bond, forged in the crucible of war, was now being tempered into something deeper, something forged of mutual respect and a quiet, shared understanding of the burdens of leadership. The moral fabric of that leadership was tested sooner than either of them expected. The collapse of Baroque works had left a power vacuum. While the senior agents had been captured or had fled, thousands of lower-ranked members, thugs, spies, and enforcers, had simply melted back into the populace. With their organization shattered, many had turned to banditry, preying on the very trade routes that were the lifeblood of Alabasta's recovery. A report came in one morning, delivered by a frantic merchant. A large caravan carrying vital medical supplies to the outer oases had been ambushed and seized. The bandits were demanding a hefty ransom. Vivi immediately began to organize a response, dispatching a contingent of the royal guard under Shaka's command. It was the proper way, the legal way. Naruto, listening to the report, felt a familiar surge of impatient resolve. People were suffering. The solution was simple. "Let me handle it," he said, cutting into their strategy session. Vivi looked at him, a slight frown on her face. "Shaka has it under control. They'll surround the bandits' hideout and negotiate for the release of the hostages and the medicine." "Negotiate?" Naruto scoffed, the sound incredulous. "They're criminals who are holding back medicine from sick people. There's nothing to negotiate." Before she could protest further, he was gone. Not in a blur of speed, but with a simple flicker, a shunshin technique so fast it looked like he had simply ceased to be in the room. He reappeared on a sun-baked mesa overlooking a narrow canyon, an hour's journey from the capital. Below, the bandits, a motley crew of about 50 men, were celebrating their score around the captured caravan. He extended his sage senses, feeling their greasy confidence, their casual cruelty. He also felt the fear of the captured caravan guards, tied up and thrown in a cage. Naruto didn't descend like a storm. He simply dropped from the mesa, landing silently in the center of their camp. One of the bandits, a large man with a grotesque tattoo covering his face, turned, a bottle of liquor in his hand. He saw Naruto standing there and blinked. "Who the hell are you?" Naruto didn't answer. He just looked at the man, then at the others, his expression flat. "The medicine. The prisoners. Leave it all and walk away. This is your only warning." The tattooed man roared with laughter. "Walk away. Boys, look what we have here. Some kinda hero." The other bandits laughed with him, grabbing for their swords and guns. Naruto sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." He brought his hands together in a simple clap. It wasn't loud, just a sharp smack that echoed unnaturally in the canyon. He channeled his sage art, not into a destructive blast, but into a wave of pure, kinetic force, perfectly controlled. It was the principle of frog kumite, the invisible punch, but magnified 100-fold and deployed as a silent, omnidirectional shockwave. The bandits froze. Their eyes went wide with a confusion that didn't even have time to register as fear. Then, as one, all 50 of them were thrown backwards, as if struck by a giant, invisible hand. They flew a dozen feet through the air, landing in unconscious heaps, their weapons scattering in the dust. The entire engagement had lasted less than 5 seconds. There was no blood, no death, just sudden, absolute defeat. He released the caravan guards, who stared at him with wide, terrified eyes, and then, using a dozen clones, herded the unconscious bandits together, bound them securely, and had them and the caravan back at the gates of Alabasta before Shaka's forces had even made it halfway to the canyon. He strode into the throne room, expecting praise, or at least relief. Instead, he was met with the stern, disapproving faces of Igaram and the royal council. Vivi stood beside her father's throne, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable but tight. "The bandits have been apprehended," Naruto announced, feeling a prickle of defensive confusion. "The medicine is secure." "Lord Naruto," Igaram said, his voice stiff with protocol. "By what authority did you act as judge and enforcer? These men, criminal though they may be, are citizens of Alabasta. They have a right to a trial. They gave up their rights when they decided to let people die for a profit," Naruto retorted, his patience thinning. "That is not for you to decide," another council member snapped. "We have laws. Procedures. Your actions, while effective, undermine the very foundation of the justice system we are trying to rebuild." Naruto was about to argue, to tell them that laws were useless if they couldn't protect people, but Vivi held up a hand, silencing the room. "Leave us," she said to the council. They bowed and shuffled out, leaving Naruto alone with her and her father. She walked down the steps and stood before him. She wasn't angry. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet and measured, which was somehow worse. "Naruto, what you did was born of a good heart," she began. "But they are right. You cannot be a law unto yourself. It was the fastest way to solve the problem, Vivi." "Sometimes the fastest way is not the right way," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "For years, this country was ruled by the will of one man, Crocodile. He bent and broke laws to suit his needs, all under the guise of the greater good. We are trying to build a nation of laws, not a nation that depends on the whims of a powerful man. The people must have faith in the system, in the courts, in their own guards. If their only hope is to wait for you to swoop in and solve their problems, what have we truly built? It's just a kinder, gentler version of the same tyranny." Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Tyranny. It was a word he never thought could be associated with him. He, who had fought his entire life for freedom and recognition. He looked at her, at the passion in her eyes, and understood. She wasn't just talking about laws and procedures. She was talking about the soul of her nation. He had the power to fix any problem, but she had the wisdom to see that true strength lay in teaching the people how to fix problems themselves. He felt a flush of shame. He had been so focused on the result that he had completely ignored the process. He, the man who wanted to be Hokage, who was supposed to understand the heart of the people, had forgotten the most important lesson. "You're right," he said, his voice low. He met her eyes, his own full of a new, dawning respect. "I'm sorry. I was arrogant. I see now." Vivi's stern expression softened. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "I know your heart, Naruto. But to lead, you must have more than just strength. You must have wisdom. And you must trust my people to be strong on their own." He nodded, the lesson settling deep within him. It was a pivotal moment, a shift in their dynamic. He was no longer just the protector and she the protected. They were partners, learning from each other, balancing his strength with her wisdom. A few days later, while working on the new aqueduct system near the ruins of a forgotten settlement deep in the desert, the two sides of their world collided. A team of Naruto's clones was digging a deep trench for the foundation of a pumping station when their shovels struck something that wasn't sand or rock. It was a deep, resonant thud of metal on carved stone. Curious, the clones cleared the area, uncovering a massive, perfectly smooth stone slab decorated with geometric patterns unlike any Alabastan art. With a concerted effort, they heaved the slab aside, revealing a dark, square opening leading down into the earth. A puff of stale, ancient air washed over them. Naruto, miles away in the palace, felt it through their link. A sudden jolt of discovery. He created a new clone and sent it to investigate directly. The clone descended into the darkness, creating a small sphere of light in its palm. It found itself in a square, stone chamber. The walls were covered in intricate, faded murals. As the clone moved the light across them, a story unfolded. The first mural showed a lush, green paradise. A great river flowed through it, and in the center stood a figure made of pure light, a radiant, sun-like being, its arms outstretched as strange and wonderful animals drank from the water. The second mural was jarring. It depicted strange, crescent-shaped ships descending from a black sky. Figures in stark, sterile-looking suits emerged, their faces hidden behind helmets. Their posture was rigid, demanding. They were the men from the sky, from the ancient legends. The third showed a terrible battle. The sun being, its form now a furious vortex of fire, clashed with the sky people and their strange, energy-based weapons. The land around them was burning, the trees turning to ash, the river boiling away into steam. The paradise was becoming a desert. The fourth showed the aftermath. The sun being, weakened, was being forced into a colossal stone sarcophagus by the sky people, who were performing some kind of ritual, their hands glowing with a cold, blue light. The sarcophagus was then buried deep beneath the earth. The final mural was a prophecy. It showed the night sky, filled with constellations Naruto didn't recognize. But one celestial body was unmistakable, a single, blazing star, depicted with a wild, spiky corona, falling from the heavens toward their world. Below it, the stone sarcophagus was shown, cracks of light spiderwebbing across its surface. Beneath the image was a line of ancient text. Naruto, through his clone, felt a deep, resonant thrum of energy coming from the floor. It was the seal. It was ancient, unimaginably powerful, and it felt, asleep. But his own six paths energy, the very essence of his being, seemed to resonate with it, a low hum that made the air vibrate. He was the falling star. His arrival was the catalyst. He didn't understand what the being was, but he knew with absolute certainty that it was dangerous and that its seal was tied to him. He ordered his clones to pull the stone slab back into place, burying the entrance completely. He would tell Vivi, but he needed to understand more first. This was a secret too dangerous to reveal without a plan. As his clones filled the trench, turning the site back into a simple construction zone, a lone figure watched from the peak of a distant dune. Strix lowered her specialized binoculars, her face a mask of cold calculation under her cowl. She hadn't seen the murals, but she hadn't needed to. Her instruments had picked up the massive, dormant energy signature the moment the clones had opened the seal, and she had felt the subtle, terrifying resonance it shared with Naruto's own power. She raised the black den mushi to her lips. Celestial command, she whispered, her voice colder than the desert night. The Alabasta protocol is active. Kitsune's presence has caused a fluctuation in the primary containment field of subject, soul. The prophecy of the falling star is confirmed. She listened to the silent, grave instructions from her masters. Understood. Moving to Phase 2. Active surveillance and preparation for pacification. The subject cannot be allowed to awaken. The cost is irrelevant. She tucked the den mushi away and vanished into the swirling sands, a ghost leaving no trace. The whispers in the oasis were growing louder, converging into a scream that would soon shake the foundations of the world. Chapter 4, The Seafoam Blade's Gambit. The new era of peace in Alabasta was a fragile bloom in the desert, beautiful but vulnerable. While Naruto's power had made the reconstruction effort miraculously swift, it had also painted a target on the kingdom's back. The whispers that had started in the world government's shadowed halls had grown into a concerted, strategic murmur. They could not attack Alabasta directly, not with its standing and not with the political shield King Cobra had thrown over Naruto. So, they chose a different weapon, words. It began subtly. Articles in the World Economic Journal, penned by anonymous but highly placed marine sources, began to question the stability of the Desert Kingdom. They spoke of a foreign entity with unimaginable power now dictating policy in Alabasta. They painted Naruto not as a savior, but as a usurper, a charismatic monster who had bewitched the royal family. The stories were clever, seeded with just enough truth to be plausible. They mentioned his army of clones, framing it not as a tool of reconstruction but as an occupying force. They described the defeat of Crocodile not as liberation, but as a violent coup, conveniently omitting the warlord's treason. The propaganda was a slow-acting poison. At first, the people of Alabasta, filled with gratitude, dismissed it. But the campaign was relentless. Merchant ships arriving in Nanohana brought news from the outside world. They spoke of fear, of how other kingdoms were growing wary of Alabasta's new guardian. The whispers started to seep into the marketplace chatter, into the quiet conversations in taverns. Doubt, once planted, had deep roots. Could one man be trusted with so much power? What would happen if he ever turned against them? Vivi fought it with all her political acumen, issuing statements, holding public addresses, reminding her people of the truth. But she was fighting a ghost, a faceless campaign orchestrated by the most powerful institution in the world. The campaign found its face when Vice Admiral Kaido returned. He did not arrive with a Buster Call fleet this time. He came on a single, gleaming white battleship that docked peacefully in Nanohana's main port. He descended the gangplank not as a warrior, but as a diplomat, flanked by aides carrying scrolls and briefcases. He requested an audience at the palace, and by the laws of their treaty, he could not be refused. He stood once more in the great throne room, but the atmosphere was entirely different. His demeanor was not one of cold fury, but of calm, reasonable concern. He bowed deeply to King Cobra and Queen Vivi, who now sat on thrones side by side, Naruto standing just behind and to the right of her, a silent, imposing presence. "Your Majesties," Kaido began, his voice smooth and persuasive. "I do not come today as an antagonist, but as a concerned partner in the world government. The world is watching Alabasta, and it is afraid. The world has no reason to fear us," Vivi countered, her voice firm. "We seek only peace and prosperity for our people." "And you shall have it," Kaido said with a winning smile. "Which is why the 5 elders have authorized me to make an unprecedented offer." He unfurled a grand scroll. "In exchange for the peaceful surrender of the entity known as Naruto Uzumaki into our custody, the world government will fund the complete reconstruction of Alabasta. We will provide our most advanced irrigation technology, 10 times more effective than your current efforts. We will establish a permanent marine base to protect your shores from any and all pirate threats. We will grant Alabasta a favored trade status that will make it the wealthiest kingdom in paradise." The room fell silent. It was a staggering offer. It was everything the kingdom needed, a golden age delivered on a silver platter. But the price was Naruto. "You are asking us to sell our savior," Cobra rasped, his eyes blazing. "I am asking you to choose the guaranteed future of your 3 million citizens over the uncertain fate of one man," Kaido replied smoothly, his logic impeccable and ruthless. He turned his gaze on the silent members of the royal council, on the guards lining the walls. His words were for them. "Lord Naruto is powerful, yes. But his power is a magnet for conflict. As long as he remains here, Alabasta will be a focal point for every enemy of the world government, for every ambitious pirate seeking to make a name for themselves. He is not a shield. He is a lightning rod. Accept our offer, and your kingdom will know true, lasting peace." The poison was now injected directly into the heart of the kingdom. The council members shifted uncomfortably. They had seen the reports. They had felt the fear from their trading partners. Kaido's offer was a devil's bargain, but it was a tempting one. Naruto watched the scene unfold, his expression impassive. He could feel the shift in the room, the wavering loyalty, the conflict in their hearts. Kaido was a master manipulator, preying on their deepest fears. "The answer is no," Vivi said, her voice ringing like a steel bell. "Alabasta does not sell its friends." Kaido's smile didn't falter. "A noble sentiment, your majesty. But is it a wise one? The people may not agree." He bowed again. The offer stands for 1 week. I will await your answer. I trust you will make the decision that is best for your kingdom. He turned and walked out, leaving a schism in his wake. The next few days were hell. The council was deeply divided, arguing in heated, closed-door sessions. The public, now aware of the government's offer, was split. The promise of wealth and security was a powerful lure. Protests, small at first, began to form in the capital, some in support of Naruto, others demanding the council accept the deal. The unity of Alabasta, so recently reforged, was cracking. Naruto saw the torment in Vivi's eyes. She was being forced to choose between her loyalty to him and the well-being of her people, the very trap Kaido had set. He found her late one night on the palace balcony, staring out at the divided city. "This is my fault," he said, coming to stand beside her. She shook her head, not looking at him. "No. This is their fault. They are twisting your gift into a curse." "Kaido's right about one thing," Naruto said quietly. "I am a lightning rod. My being here, it's putting you all in danger. Maybe I should just go." Vivi whipped around, her eyes flashing with a fierce anger he had never seen directed at him. "Don't you dare," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't you dare say that. You made a promise. You said we would rebuild it together. Are you going to run away the first time it gets hard?" "I'm not running away," he shot back, stung by her words. "I'm trying to protect you. If I leave, Kaido leaves you alone. The offer stands. Your kingdom gets everything it needs." "And what about what I need?" she cried, taking a step closer, her hands clenched into fists. "Did you ever think of that? You show up here and turn my entire world upside down, you give us back the rain, you give us back hope, you make me believe in miracles again, and now you think you can just leave and everything will be fine. It won't. It would be a lie. We would be a prosperous kingdom built on a foundation of betrayal. I would rather rule over a desert of honorable people than a paradise of cowards." The raw, desperate honesty of her words silenced him. He saw the tears glistening in her eyes and realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had been thinking like a strategist, a weapon to be deployed or withdrawn. He had forgotten about the man who had made a promise to the woman standing before him. He had forgotten about the bonds they had forged over late-night lessons and shared burdens. "You're right," he said, his voice soft. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was electric, a silent acknowledgement of the deep, unspoken current that ran between them. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm sorry." She leaned into his touch for a fraction of a second, a silent surrender, before pulling back, her composure returning. "Then we have to fight him. But not with fists. We have to fight his idea." The solution, when it came, was radical. It was Naruto's idea, born from a deep understanding of spectacle and the heart of the common man. He walked into the emergency council session the next day, interrupting their furious debate. "I will settle this," he announced, his voice commanding the attention of every person in the room. He looked directly at Vivi, a silent question in his eyes. She gave him a firm, resolute nod. She trusted him. He turned back to the council. "Send a message to Vice Admiral Kaido. I accept his challenge. Not his deal, his challenge. He wants to prove I'm a monster, a threat. I will face him, one-on-one, in the arena of Alabasta. No tricks, no armies. Just me and him. If he wins, I will surrender myself to his custody without protest. But if I win, he let the words hang in the air. If I win, the world government will formally recognize my position as guardian of Alabasta, and they will never interfere in this kingdom's affairs again." It was an insane gamble. He was betting his freedom on a single fight. But it was also a stroke of political genius. It shifted the narrative from a complex political debate to a simple, heroic duel. A trial by combat. A story the people could understand. Kaito, when he received the message, laughed. His plan had been to win with politics, but a public duel was even better. He was a vice-admiral of the Marines, a master of Rokushiki and a powerful hockey user. He had supreme confidence in his abilities. Defeating this guardian in front of the very people he claimed to protect would shatter his myth forever. He agreed instantly. The day of the duel, the great arena of Alabasta was packed to overflowing. Every seat was taken, and thousands more crowded the streets outside, listening on broadcast Den Den Mushi. The atmosphere was thick with a tension that was almost unbearable. This wasn't a fight for sport. It was a fight for the soul of their nation. Vivi and her father sat in the royal box, their faces pale but composed. Vivi's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. Down on the sands of the arena, Kaito stood waiting. He had shed his formal uniform for a simple, sleeveless tunic, his muscular frame on full display. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He didn't need one. Naruto entered from the opposite gate. The roar of the crowd was a physical wave of sound. He walked to the center of the arena, the sun beating down on him. He felt the hopes and fears of every person present. "Are you ready to face the consequences of your arrogance, guardian?" Kaito called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm ready to end this," Naruto replied calmly. The signal was given. The duel began. Kaito was a whirlwind of motion. He vanished, using Sora to appear directly in front of Naruto, his legs scything through the air in a powerful Rankyaku, a blade of compressed air that could slice through steel. Naruto didn't dodge. He simply leaned his head to the side, the air blade hissing past his ear, cutting a deep gash in the stone wall behind him. Before Kaito could follow up, Naruto's leg snapped out in a simple, precise kick aimed at the vice-admiral's knee. It wasn't flashy, but it was incredibly fast. Kaito, surprised by the speed, was forced to use Tekkai to harden his body, the impact ringing out like a hammer on an anvil. He was thrown back, skidding to a halt on the sand, his eyes wide with surprise. "You're faster than the report suggested," Kaito said, his condescending tone gone, replaced by the sharp focus of a true fighter. "The reports are wrong about a lot of things," Naruto said, settling into a low fighting stance. The battle that followed was a masterclass in high-level combat. It was a clash of philosophies as much as fists. Kaito was all rigid forms and explosive power, the embodiment of the world government's ordered, overwhelming might. He flowed from one Rokushiki technique to the next, his limbs becoming spears with Shurgan, his body as hard as iron, his movements as fast as thought. He coated his hands and feet in a gleaming, obsidian layer of armament haki. This was the origin of his moniker. His haki was so dense and controlled it mimicked the properties of seastone, disrupting the energy of devil fruit users on contact. He called it the seafoam blade. He gambled that it would have a similar disruptive effect on Naruto's strange energy. Naruto, in contrast, was fluid, adaptable, unpredictable. He entered Sage mode, the golden pigmentation highlighting his eyes. He didn't need to match Kaito's raw power. His perception was now on another level. He could see the flow of Kaito's movements before they happened, feel the intent behind every muscle twitch. He flowed around the vice-admiral's furious assault, dodging, parrying, redirecting. He was untouchable. Kaito's seafoam blade haki scraped against his defenses, and Naruto could feel the slight, irritating disruption in his chakra flow, like static on a line. The vice-admiral was good. Dangerously good. "You do nothing but run." Kaito roared in frustration, unleashing a flurry of Shurgan strikes, his fingers blurring as they stabbed at Naruto's vital points. Is this the power of a god? The power of a coward? "I haven't even started to try," Naruto replied calmly. He saw an opening, a fractional overextension in Kaito's lunge. He didn't counter with a punch or a kick. He simply pushed his palm forward into Kaito's chest. The frog Kumite. A wave of invisible sage energy struck the vice-admiral, bypassing his Tekai and his Haki completely. Kaido's eyes bulged. He felt as if he'd been struck by a speeding train. The air was driven from his lungs, and he was sent tumbling across the arena, crashing into the far wall with enough force to crack the stone. He staggered to his feet, coughing, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. The crowd gasped. The invincible vice-admiral was bleeding. Kaido looked at Naruto with a new, terrifying level of respect. This wasn't just a powerful anomaly. This was a true master of a martial art he had never conceived of. His gambit was failing. He had to end this now. "I see now," Kaido said, his voice a low growl. "I cannot afford to hold back." He took a deep breath, and the air around him seemed to thicken. His haki, a deep, menacing black, coated not just his arms, but his entire body. He looked like a statue carved from obsidian. This is the pinnacle of the government's power. The ultimate expression of order. Rokushiki Oji, Saishu Kakujo. 6 powers ultimate skill, final black rope. He shot forward, faster than even his Soru, a black blur of pure destructive intent. He was aiming everything, his entire power, into a single, decisive strike. Naruto's sage senses screamed. This attack was different. It was condensed, absolute. It could shatter mountains. He knew, with utter certainty, that he could meet it head-on with a Rasengan or a Bijou bomb and obliterate Kaido completely. But that would prove Kaido right. It would make him the monster. He had to win, but he had to win in a way that preserved his own ideals. He had to show control, not just power. He took a deep breath, sinking deeper into his sage mode. He saw the attack coming, a straight line, a spear of absolute force. He also saw Kaido's path, the slight shift of his feet, the twist of his torso. The answer wasn't to overpower it. It was to outthink it. At the very last second, as Kaido's haki-coated fist was about to atomize him, Naruto moved. He didn't dodge. He pivoted on his heel, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. He used Kaido's own momentum against him, his hand catching the vice-admiral's wrist, not to block, but to guide. He flowed with the attack, spinning in a fluid circle, pulling Kaido along with him. The vice-admiral's unstoppable punch, now slightly redirected, slammed into the arena floor, carving a massive, molten trench in the stone and sand. The force of the impact sent a shockwave that threw dust and debris into the air. Kaido was off balance, his ultimate attack spent on empty ground. And in that moment of vulnerability, Naruto completed his spin, his other hand, holding a small, perfectly formed, humming Rasengan, tapping gently against the center of Kaido's back. He didn't thrust it. He just let the rotational energy do its work. It wasn't a killing blow. It was a disarming one. The vortex of chakra spun against Kaido's spine, neutralizing the flow of energy to his limbs. Kaido froze. His obsidian haki flickered and died. His arms and legs went numb, the strength draining out of them in an instant. He collapsed to his knees, his body refusing his commands, his mind reeling in disbelief. He was utterly, completely defeated. He hadn't just been beaten. He had been outclassed, outthought, and shown a mercy he did not deserve. Naruto stood over him, the Rasengan fading from his palm. He hadn't even broken a sweat. A stunned silence held the arena for a long, breathless moment. Then, a single person began to clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire arena erupted into a deafening roar of applause and cheers. They weren't just cheering for a victor. They were cheering for their champion, for their guardian, who had won not with monstrous power, but with grace, wisdom, and restraint. In the royal box, Vivi was on her feet, tears of relief and pride streaming down her face. He had done it. He had saved them all, again. Naruto looked up at her, and across the distance of the arena, their eyes met. He gave her a wide, brilliant grin, the one he reserved for his greatest victories. The grin of Naruto Uzumaki. But in that moment of triumph, as the crowd chanted his name, a new threat made its move. High up in the shadowed archways of the arena's upper levels, Strix knelt, a long, slender rifle in her hands. It was a custom-made weapon, silent, air-powered. The projectile was a small, needle-like dart forged from the highest purity sea stone, its tip coated in a fast-acting neurotoxin. Her orders were clear: if Kitsune won, neutralize him. His victory, his connection with the crowd, the look he shared with the queen, it made him more dangerous, not less. He was integrating, becoming a beloved leader. Unacceptable. Her timing was perfect. In the chaotic aftermath of the duel, with all eyes on the arena floor, no one would see her. She had been tracking him through the entire fight, waiting for the one moment his concentration might waver. His triumphant grin at the queen was that moment. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The dart flew, a silent, invisible streak of death, aimed directly at the back of Naruto's neck. But Naruto was still deep in sage mode. His senses were not limited to sight and sound. He felt the minute disturbance in the air, the flicker of killing intent from the shadows, the unnatural energy of the sea stone projectile. He didn't have time to fully dodge or block. So he adapted. His grin at Vivi widened, and he threw his arms up in a gesture of victory to the crowd. It looked like a natural, celebratory movement. But it was a calculated motion. He shifted his posture, turning his torso just enough so that the dart, instead of striking his neck, buried itself harmlessly in the thick muscle of his shoulder. A sharp, cold jolt went through him as the sea stone made contact, the chakra in his shoulder fizzling out like a snuffed candle. The neurotoxin began to spread. It was potent. But his Uzumaki vitality and the purifying nature of the Six Paths chakra immediately went to war with it, containing and neutralizing it in seconds. To the crowd, it looked like he just flinched from a muscle cramp. He lowered his arms, his grin never wavering, his eyes sweeping the upper archways. He had sensed the dart's trajectory, the general direction of the attack. But the assassin was already gone, melting back into the shadows, a ghost in the wind. He knew. Someone had tried to kill him. And they had used a weapon that was not part of Kaido's arsenal. This was a different enemy, one that operated from the shadows. His victory was not the end of his problems. It was just the beginning of a new, more dangerous chapter. Chapter 5, A Vow Under the Sun. The victory celebration in Alabasta was a festival of pure, unadulterated joy. The tension that had gripped the nation for a week shattered into a million pieces of relief. The streets were filled with music and dancing. Merchants gave away food and drink. The name Naruto was a chant, a cheer, a prayer of thanks on everyone's lips. He had not only won the duel, he had won the unwavering heart of Alabasta. Kaido, true to his word and the code of a warrior, had conceded with public formality. Before departing with his fleet, he had sent a formal communiqué to the 5 elders, detailing his defeat and advising the immediate recognition of Naruto's official status. The world government was forced, publicly and humiliatingly, to back down. For a time, at least, Alabasta would be left alone. But in the quiet halls of the palace, the mood was far more somber. The victory felt hollow, tainted by the secret knowledge of the assassin's dart. Naruto stood before King Cobra and Vivi in the king's private study. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. On a small, velvet tray on the table between them sat the dart. A thin, wicked-looking needle of greenish-black stone. Pell, who had retrieved it from Naruto's shoulder with a pair of tweezers, stood grimly by the door. "Sea stone," Cobra said, his voice heavy with dread. He poked at it with a letter opener, his hand trembling slightly. "But not raw ore. This has been purified, weaponized. And the toxin, our royal physicians have never seen its like. They say it would have killed a normal man in 3 seconds." Naruto's shoulder was completely healed, not even a scar remaining. His system had burned the poison out before it could travel more than a few inches. But the implications of the attack sent a chill through him that no physical poison could match. Kaido wouldn't have used this, Naruto stated, his voice flat. It's not his style. This is an assassin's weapon. A coward's weapon. It was fired from the upper levels of the arena, Pell added, his falcon-like eyes dark with fury. We found the point of origin. A small scrape mark on the stone. Whoever it was, they were a professional. They left no other trace. Vivi stared at the dart, her face a mask of pale fury. They waited until he won, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They waited until he was celebrating, with his guard down. This wasn't about the duel. This was an execution. The truth settled in the room, heavy and suffocating. They had an enemy who did not follow rules of engagement, who did not announce themselves with battleships. They had a ghost in their midst, a ghost with the resources to craft weapons of seastone and undetectable poisons. A ghost that answered to an authority higher and more ruthless than a marine vice-admiral. The propaganda, the political pressure, the duel, it was all a test, Cobra surmised, his strategic mind piecing it together. They wanted to see the limits of your power, Naruto. They wanted to gauge the loyalty of our people. When their political gambit failed, and their chosen champion was defeated, they moved to the final solution. He looked at Naruto, his old eyes filled with a new and terrible fear. This will not be the last attempt. As long as you are merely the guardian, you are a political shield. But a shield can be broken. You remain an outsider, a powerful but separate entity. They can justify targeting you, claiming you are a threat they are surgically removing from our kingdom. He leaned forward, his expression grave, the weight of his dynasty, of his daughter's future, settling on his shoulders. There is only one way to make you untouchable. One way to bind you to Alabasta so completely that any attack on you is, without question, an attack on the royal bloodline itself. One way to grant you the ultimate sovereign immunity, a status even the 5 elders would not dare to challenge openly. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. He looked from Naruto's confused face to Vivi's, whose eyes had suddenly gone wide with a shocking, dawning understanding of what her father was about to propose. Naruto Uzumaki, King Cobra said, his voice resonating with the authority of his ancestors. I am asking you to marry my daughter. I am asking you to become a prince of Alabasta. The silence that followed was absolute. Naruto stared at the king, his mind completely blank. Marry Vivi. The idea was so far beyond anything he had ever considered that his brain simply refused to process it. He looked at Vivi, searching for some kind of reaction. She was frozen, her face pale, her lips slightly parted in shock. Her mind was a whirlwind of duty, politics, and a sudden, terrifying flutter in her own heart that she had been refusing to acknowledge for months. Father, you can't be serious, she finally managed to say, her voice strained. I have never been more serious in my life, Cobra replied, his gaze unwavering. This is not a suggestion born of sentiment. It is a political necessity. It is the single most effective strategic move we have left. As her husband, the prince consort, you would be family. Part of the Nefertari line in the eyes of the world. The narrative changes. You are no longer a foreign guardian. You are a son of Alabasta. It makes you a legitimate ruler, and it shields our kingdom from the machinations of those who fear you. He softened his tone, looking between the two of them. I know this is unorthodox. I know I am placing an immense burden on you both. He looked at his daughter. Vivi, I would never force you into a marriage against your will. Not for any price. He then turned to Naruto. And Naruto, I would not ask you to bind yourself to a nation and a family out of mere obligation. He stood, leaning heavily on his cane, and walked toward the door. The choice is yours, and yours alone. I will not be a part of it. Discuss it. Search your own hearts. But understand the stakes. The future of this kingdom, and your very lives, may depend on your answer. With that, he and Pell exited the study, leaving Naruto and Vivi alone in the suffocating silence. Naruto couldn't look at her. He paced the length of the room, his mind racing. Marriage. It was an abstract concept to him, something other people did. Jiraiya had spoken of love and women with a sort of comical reverence, but for Naruto, his life had always been about missions, training, and a singular, all-consuming goal. He thought of Sakura, a youthful crush that had long since faded into a deep, familial affection. He thought of Hinata, whose quiet devotion he had only begun to understand before he was torn from his world. But this was different. This wasn't about a confession behind the schoolhouse. This was a proposal for a political alliance, a strategic merger of his power and her lineage. Vivi remained by the table, her hands gripping the back of a chair. Her father's words echoed in her ears. A political necessity. He was right, of course. From a purely logical standpoint, it was the perfect move. It would solve everything. It would cement Naruto's place, protect him, and solidify their nation against the world. But it felt so cold, so clinical. To marry a man, to marry this man, for politics. This is insane, Naruto finally said, breaking the silence. He stopped pacing and ran a hand through his spiky hair. He wants us to get married. Just like that. Like it's a business deal. For him, it is, Vivi said quietly, her back still to him. For a king, marriage is always a business deal. An alliance. A treaty. It's how dynasties are secured. Well, I'm not a dynasty, Naruto shot back, frustrated. I'm just me. I can't just marry someone because it's a good strategy. And you think I can? She retorted, spinning around to face him, her own frustration boiling over. You think this is what I dreamed of? An arranged marriage to a man who fell out of the sky, all to stop a secret organization from assassinating him? Her words, sharp and sarcastic, hung in the air between them. The absurdity of their situation, laid bare, was almost comical. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and his own frustration began to dissipate, replaced by a shared sense of the sheer madness of it all. A small, choked laugh escaped his lips. When you put it like that, a reluctant smile touched her own lips. It's ridiculous. Completely ridiculous, he agreed. The tension broke. They weren't a prince and a guardian discussing a treaty anymore. They were just two young people, caught in a situation far bigger than either of them. My father is right, though, Vivi said, her voice softening. She walked over to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain, letting the late afternoon sun stream in. Strategically. It's the only move that gives us a permanent solution. Naruto came to stand beside her, looking out at the city below. But it's not just a strategy, is it? It's the rest of our lives. He turned to her, his expression serious, all traces of humor gone. Vivi, I can't do that to you. I can't ask you to tie your life to mine just to keep me safe. You deserve to marry someone you love. The word hung in the air between them. Love. Vivi's heart gave a painful throb. She thought of the past few months. The late-night lessons in the library, his patient struggles with her language. The way he looked at her when she laughed. The easy companionship, the shared understanding that often needed no words. The feeling of absolute safety she felt whenever he was near. The fierce, protective surge she'd felt when he talked about leaving. Was that love? Or was it just gratitude and camaraderie, forged in the heat of their shared struggle? She didn't know. She was too confused, too overwhelmed to tell the difference. And what about you? She asked, turning the question back on him. Could you do it? Could you marry me? A woman you barely know, from a world you don't understand. Bind yourself to this land, this desert, forever. He met her gaze, and for the first time, he let himself truly think about it. He thought of his life before, a life of constant struggle, of chasing a dream that, once achieved, had left him feeling adrift. Then he thought of his life here. He thought of the purpose he felt when he saw the first green shoots push through the sand. He thought of the simple joy of watching the market bustle with life. He thought of her unwavering spirit, her sharp mind, her surprising humor, the quiet strength that had called to him from across a burning city. This place, she, had become his anchor. It was the first place since the war that had truly felt like home. I wouldn't be binding myself to a desert, he said, his voice low and full of a dawning realization. I'd be binding myself to you. And that, he hesitated, searching for the right words, for the truth. That doesn't feel like a burden. When I'm with you, helping you, I feel, right. Like this is where I'm supposed to be. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. It wasn't a declaration of passionate love, but something quieter, deeper. A confession of belonging. Vivi felt the sincerity of his words resonate deep in her soul. He wasn't talking about politics anymore. He was talking about them. She realized that her own fears weren't about the marriage itself, but about the reason for it. She didn't want to be a political convenience to him. But if he felt that this was his home, that she was his home. The people love you, she said softly, thinking aloud. They call you the stormbreaker, the sunbringer. A marriage between us, it would be a symbol. The union of the old Alabasta and the new. A promise of a future that is both strong and wise. Is that what you want? He asked, his blue eyes searching hers. A symbol? No, she whispered, and the truth of it was a sudden, sharp clarity. I want a partner. I want someone who will stand with me, who will fight for this kingdom as hard as I do. Someone I can trust, completely and absolutely. Her gaze was unwavering. I trust you, Naruto. More than anyone. In that moment, everything shifted. The political necessity, the threat of assassins, it all faded into the background, becoming the catalyst rather than the reason. What was left was the two of them, on a balcony, with the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. The question was no longer about a strategic alliance. It was about a shared future. He saw the trust in her eyes, the hope, and the hint of fear. And he knew his answer. This was his new path. This was his new promise. Okay, he said, his voice firm. Let's do it. Let's get married. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Vivi's face, chasing away all the doubt and fear. It was a smile of pure relief and a dawning, terrifying joy. Okay, she breathed. The wedding was planned with a speed that left the rest of the world breathless. King Cobra announced the royal engagement, framing it as a fairy tale come to life, the brave queen and her heroic guardian, united by love and a shared vision for their kingdom. The news exploded across the globe. For the people of Alabasta, it was a cause for the greatest celebration in their history. For the world government, it was a political nightmare. The Gorosei, the 5 shadowy elders who ruled the world, were incandescent with rage. The report from Strix, confirming the marriage, lay on their table. He is cementing his power base, one of them, a tall man with a long white beard, hissed. An ancient kingdom, one of the 20 founders, a family that refused to ascend to marry Geos, now allied by blood to an entity with the power of a god. This is an existential threat. Kaido's incompetence has led to this, another, a bald man with a massive scar, growled. It matters not, said their leader, a man in a white robe with a gentle demeanor that belied his absolute authority. The agent's assessment is correct. This union makes Kitsune part of a sovereign royal line. A direct attack is now impossible without triggering a global political crisis. We must reevaluate. His eyes narrowed. CPA-0 will no longer simply observe. Strix is authorized to move to pacification protocols. The target is no longer just the man. It is the entire royal family. The Nefertari line has become a liability. If they will not be controlled, they will be removed. Unaware of the death sentence being passed in the highest echelons of power, Alabasta celebrated. The wedding was a grand affair, a spectacle of hope and rebirth. The entire city of Alabasta was decorated in ribbons of blue and gold. Vivi was breathtaking in a traditional Alabastan wedding gown of flowing white silk, embroidered with golden suns, a delicate veil covering her face. Naruto stood on the grand steps of the palace, waiting for her. He was dressed in formal royal attire, a white and gold tunic that felt stiff and unnatural. He felt more nervous than he had before any battle. This was a different kind of challenge, a different kind of vow. As Vivi walked towards him, escorted by her proud, weeping father, the roar of the crowd was deafening. But Naruto only saw her. When she reached him and lifted her veil, her blue eyes met his, and in that moment, the political necessity, the threat of their enemies, all of it vanished. He saw only Vivi, his partner, his friend, his future. The vows they exchanged were broadcast across the kingdom. They were the formal, ancient words of the Nefertari dynasty, but when they spoke them to each other, they imbued them with their own, personal meaning. I, Naruto Uzumaki, vow to stand by you, to protect you and our people, to be the shield of this kingdom and the strength at your side, for all my days. I, Nefertari Vivi, vow to stand with you, to guide you, to be the heart of this kingdom and the wisdom at your side, for all my days. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, prince consort and queen of Alabasta, the cheer that went up from the crowd seemed to shake the very foundations of the sky. Later that night, long after the celebrations had quieted, they stood together on that same balcony where they had made their decision. The city below was aglow with soft lights, peaceful. A cool desert breeze drifted past them. Vivi leaned her head against his shoulder. Prince Naruto, she said, testing the title on her tongue. It sounded strange, and wonderful. Queen Vivi, he replied, a warm smile in his voice. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. It felt natural. Right. Are you scared? She asked softly. Of what? He asked. The assassins? The world government? After everything I've faced, they're just another Tuesday. He looked down at her, his expression turning serious. The only thing that scares me is letting you down. She looked up at him, her heart swelling. This man, who could shatter armies with a thought, was afraid of failing her. You won't, she said with absolute certainty. We won't let either of us fail. We'll do it together. He leaned down, and she met him halfway. Their first kiss wasn't a fiery explosion of passion. It was a quiet promise. It was gentle, hesitant, and full of all the unspoken words and shared burdens that had led them to this moment. It was the sealing of a vow made not before a crowd, but in the quiet of their own hearts. They stood there for a long time, watching over their sleeping kingdom. The political marriage had become real. The guardian had become a king. They had forged a bond of steel and hope, a fortress against the coming storm. But as they looked out at the peaceful horizon, neither of them knew how soon that storm would break, or that the first thunderclap would be the sound of a falling king. Chapter 6, King of the Shifting Sands. The first year of their reign was a golden age. Under the joint leadership of Queen Vivi and Prince Consort Naruto, Alabasta didn't just recover, it flourished. The desert, once a symbol of their suffering, bloomed under the influence of new aqueducts and the strange, life-giving properties of Naruto's six paths chakra, which seemed to subtly enrich the very soil he walked on. Trade boomed. The people were happy, secure, and fiercely loyal to their new royal family. The marriage that had been born of grim necessity had blossomed into a true partnership, a bond of deep affection and mutual respect that was the bedrock of the kingdom's newfound strength. Naruto, for his part, had finally found his peace. He was no longer just a weapon or a symbol. He was a husband, a leader, a builder. The ache of his displaced existence had faded, replaced by the fulfilling weight of his new responsibilities. He still trained, pushing the limits of his sage abilities in the vast, empty desert, but his power was now a tool for creation more often than destruction. The fragile peace was shattered on a cool, quiet evening. Naruto was in the royal library, using a dozen clones to meticulously catalog and cross-reference ancient texts, searching for any mention of soul or the men from the sky. It was a slow, frustrating process. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, a flicker in his sage sense so faint he almost dismissed it. It was a whisper of wrongness, a tiny, discordant note in the symphony of life within the palace. He dismissed his clones, their knowledge flooding back into him, and stood up, frowning. The feeling was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He shrugged it off as a momentary lapse in concentration and headed for the royal apartments, looking for Vivi. He found her standing outside her father's study, her hand raised as if to knock, a tray with a pot of calming tea in her hands. "Is he still awake?" Naruto asked, his voice soft. King Cobra's health had been in slow decline for months. His spirit was strong, but his body was failing, the lingering effects of Crocodile's cruelty and a lifetime of stress finally taking their toll. He was having trouble sleeping, Vivi said, a worried line between her brows. "I thought this might help." She knocked softly. "Father?" There was no answer. She knocked again, a little louder. "Father, it's Vivi. I've brought you some tea." Silence. The faint sense of wrongness returned to Naruto, stronger this time, coiling in his gut. "Vivi," he said, his voice low and urgent. He gently took the tray from her hands and set it on a nearby table. "Let me." He didn't knock. He placed his hand on the heavy oak door and pushed. It swung open into the dimly lit study. King Nefertari Cobra was slumped in his favorite high-backed chair by the window, a book lying open in his lap. His head was lolled to one side, his eyes closed. A gentle breeze from the open window stirred the curtains. For a moment, it looked as if he had simply fallen asleep while reading. "Father?" Vivi whispered, stepping into the room. Naruto's sage sense screamed. The life force he was so accustomed to feeling from the king, a flickering, weak flame, but a flame nonetheless, was gone. There was only a void. An absolute, final stillness. But there was something else. A residue. The same faint, unnatural trace of energy he had felt from the assassin's dart in the arena, so subtle it was like a single molecule of poison in an ocean. It was already dissipating, a ghost of a whisper, but he could sense it clinging to the air near the king's chair. Vivi rushed to her father's side, her hands hovering over his shoulders, afraid to touch him, afraid to confirm what she already knew in her heart. "Father," she choked out, her voice breaking. Naruto moved to the other side of the chair. He looked at the king's peaceful face, then at the open book, and finally at the window. It wasn't a peaceful passing. He knew it with a certainty that was as cold and hard as steel. The window had been opened to let the killer in, and more importantly, to let the evidence out. The dissipating energy signature was proof. Vivi finally touched her father's hand. It was cool. The tears she had been holding back finally broke free, silent streams tracing paths down her cheeks. The weight of her loss, of the finality of it, crashed down on her. Naruto knelt beside her, placing a firm, grounding hand on her shoulder. He didn't speak. There were no words that could soften this. He simply knelt with her, his presence a silent shield as his queen, his wife, wept for her father. The official announcement was that King Cobra had passed peacefully in his sleep, his long struggle with his health finally over. The nation plunged into mourning. The man who had been the heart of Alabasta for decades, who had guided them through drought and war, was gone. The funeral was a somber, magnificent affair, a testament to a beloved king. Through it all, Naruto was a rock. He stood by Vivi's side, a pillar of silent strength, managing the affairs of state, comforting her in the long, quiet nights, and holding her up when her grief threatened to overwhelm her. But beneath his calm exterior, a cold, calculated rage was simmering. He knew Cobra was murdered. But he had no proof. The trace of energy was gone, and his word alone, the word of a man with godlike senses, would not be enough. It would sound like the ravings of a paranoid, power-mad consort. It would destabilize the kingdom at the worst possible moment. He was trapped. He had to find the truth, but he had to do it without tearing the grieving nation apart. The world, however, did not wait for Alabasta to mourn. Barely a week after the funeral, with the kingdom still draped in black, a new threat appeared on the horizon. It started with reports from fishing villages along the southern coast. A pirate fleet had been sighted, larger than any seen in these waters for years. It was led by a single, massive flagship flying the grinning, brutal Jolly Roger of Iron Fist, Garple, a notoriously ruthless captain from the New World with a bounty of over 400 million berries. Garple was not a subtle man. He was a brute who had carved out a small empire in the chaotic seas of the second half of the Grand Line through sheer, overwhelming force. For him to suddenly appear in paradise, the first half of the Grand Line, with his entire armada, made no sense. It was like a great white shark deciding to go hunting in a swimming pool. To Naruto and Vivi, it made perfect, sickening sense. They stood in the royal war room, a circular chamber deep within the palace, a massive, carved stone map of the kingdom serving as its central table. Pell and Shaka were there, along with the top commanders of the Alabastan army. The mood was grim. His fleet numbers over 30 ships, Pell reported, placing a marker on the map off the southern coast. They are not just sailing past. They are blockading the southern ports, sinking any merchant vessel that tries to leave. This is an act of war, Shaka growled, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. This is a test, Vivi said, her voice cold and clear. The grief was still visible in the shadows under her eyes, but the fire of a queen facing a threat to her people had burned through it. The world government would never officially sanction this, not after recognizing Naruto's status. But they do nothing to stop it. They are letting this happen. They want to see how we respond to a full-scale threat without King Cobra. They want to see how you respond. She looked at Naruto. Naruto stared at the map. His first instinct, the old Naruto's instinct, was to fly out there himself, create 1,000 clones, and sink the entire fleet in 10 minutes. It would be easy. But the lesson Vivi had taught him in the canyon months ago echoed in his mind. Sometimes the fastest way is not the right way. He was not just a warrior anymore. He was the prince consort. A king. His role was not to be the sole solution. It was to lead his people. They think I'm the only weapon this kingdom has, Naruto said, his eyes scanning the map, taking in the positions of their own forces, the geography of the coast. They think without me, Alabasta is a helpless target. And they think my only strategy is to rush out and smash things. We're going to prove them wrong on all counts. He looked up, and the commanders in the room were startled by the sudden, sharp authority in his voice. This wasn't the gentle prince consort who helped rebuild their cities. This was a commander taking charge. Pell, he ordered. You have the fastest eyes in the kingdom. I want you airborne. You are my scout. Give me constant updates on their formation, their speed, any changes. Do not engage. Understood, my lord, Pell said, nodding sharply. Shaka. You will take command of the Royal Guard's 1st and 2nd divisions. Move them to the coastline here, he pointed to a series of high cliffs overlooking the main channel leading to the largest southern port. They will be our frontline defense. I want every cannon we have positioned on those cliffs. And what of the main army? A general asked. The main army will hold back, Naruto said, his plan forming rapidly. They are expecting a land invasion. They expect us to meet them on the beaches. We won't. We will let them come into the channel. We will make them think we are afraid, that we are hiding. A confident, almost predatory smile touched his lips. Pirates like this Garple are arrogant. They rely on fear and overwhelming force. We will use that arrogance against them. We will lure their flagship, their command, into a trap. His finger tapped the narrowest point of the channel. Here. This is the kill box. The commanders stared, a new sense of hope dawning in their eyes. This wasn't a desperate defense. This was a strategy. A clever, calculated one. They were not just huddling behind their guardian. They were being led by a king. Over the next 12 hours, Alabasta moved with a quiet, deadly efficiency. Naruto stood in the war room, a nexus of information. He had a dozen clones with Pell, giving him a perfect, real-time bird's-eye view of the enemy fleet. He had another 100 clones scattered among the army divisions, relaying his orders instantly, without the need for den mushi that could be intercepted. He was a one-man command and control network, coordinating thousands of soldiers as if they were extensions of his own body. Vivi stood by his side, her role just as crucial. She managed the logistics, ensuring supplies and munitions moved to the front lines. She coordinated the evacuation of coastal towns, her calm, reassuring presence preventing panic. They worked in perfect sync, his strategic mind and her logistical heart, a two-person engine of war. As dawn broke, the pirate fleet, bold and arrogant, sailed directly into the channel. Iron Fist Garple stood on the prow of his massive, fortress-like ship, laughing. He saw the empty beaches, the silent cliffs. "See," he bellowed to his crew. "The cowards are hiding. Their precious guardian is probably wetting himself in the palace. They've lost their nerve." He ordered his fleet to press forward, to sail right into the port and begin their pillaging. From his perch high in the sky, Pell saw the flagship pass the designated point. He spoke to the clone beside him. "They're in the kill box." In the war room, Naruto heard the words as if Pell had spoken them in his ear. He looked at Vivi. And nodded. It was time. "Shaka," he commanded through his link. "Fire." From the cliffs, 100 cannons roared as one. The volley was not aimed at the ship's hull. It was aimed at the mouth of the channel they had just passed. Massive cannonballs, chained together, slammed into the narrow cliffsides, triggering a massive rockslide. A wall of stone and earth crashed into the sea, completely sealing the channel. The pirate fleet was trapped. Panic erupted on the pirate ships. Garple roared in fury, realizing his mistake too late. At the same moment, Shaka's cannons re-aimed, this time at the ships themselves, unleashing a devastating barrage into the panicked, disorganized fleet. It was a masterful trap. But Garple was a New World veteran for a reason. He was enraged, but not broken. His haki was strong. He bellowed orders, his crew rallying around him. His ship's cannons began to fire back, and his men, brutal and experienced fighters, prepared to make a landing by force, to scale the cliffs. This was the moment. The moment they expected Naruto to appear and end it. "Hold your positions," Naruto commanded his troops. "Keep up the cannon fire. Soften them up." He turned to Vivi. "It's time for me to go. But I'm not going alone." He stepped out of the war room and onto a wide balcony. Behind him, a select force of 500 of Alabasta's most elite soldiers, the Royal Sandstorm Division, were assembled. They were the best of the best, warriors who had survived the rebellion and had been training relentlessly for this day. Naruto looked at them, his expression calm and resolute. "For months, our enemies have whispered that Alabasta is weak, that its only strength lies in one man. They believe you are nothing. They believe you are sheep, huddled behind your shepherd." He drew a breath, and his voice boomed across the courtyard, filled with a power that was more than just volume. It was charisma. It was leadership. "Today, we will show them the truth. We will show them the fangs of the desert. You are not sheep. You are the sandstorm. And today, you will fight not behind me, but beside me." He turned and leaped from the balcony, a golden blur shooting towards the coast. A heartbeat later, 500 elite soldiers let out a deafening war cry and followed their king into battle. Naruto didn't appear in the middle of the enemy fleet. He landed on the cliffs, right beside Shaka, in the heart of his army. The soldiers, seeing their prince consort arrive not as a distant god but as a frontline commander, let out a roar that shook the very cliffs. Their morale surged to impossible heights. "All right, Garple," Naruto muttered, his sage eyes zeroing in on the pirate captain on the deck of his ship. "Let's finish this." He wasn't there to destroy the fleet. He was there to decapitate its leadership. He created a single clone. "You know what to do," he said. The clone grinned. "Loud and clear, boss." The clone gathered a massive amount of nature energy, forming a colossal raisin shuriken, a spinning vortex of wind that shrieked like a hurricane. He hurled it not at Garple's ship, but high into the air above the fleet. It detonated in a blinding flash, a controlled blast that created a localized, furious storm, capsizing the smaller ships and throwing the entire fleet into chaos. It was a demonstration of overwhelming power, a diversion. In that single moment of distraction, as every pirate stared in horror at the sky, the Real Naruto moved. He shot off the cliff like a golden arrow, so fast he was invisible to the naked eye. He landed on the deck of Garple's flagship as silently as a falling leaf. Garple, a giant of a man with arms literally coated in iron plates, was still bellowing at the storm when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He spun around and came face to face with Naruto. "Your Iron Fist, Garple, I presume?" Naruto asked calmly. Garple's eyes widened, and then narrowed in rage. He swung his massive iron fist, a blow that had shattered fortress gates. Naruto didn't even flinch. He caught the fist in his open palm. The sound was a dull thud. The force of the blow, which should have shattered every bone in his body, was completely absorbed. Garple stared in disbelief at his fist, held effortlessly in the grip of the much smaller man. "My turn," Naruto said. He tightened his grip. The iron plates on Garple's arm, enchanted and hardened by the finest smiths in the New World, crumpled like paper. Garple screamed, a sound of agony and shock. Naruto then delivered a single, precise chop to the back of the pirate's neck. Garple's eyes rolled back in his head, and the giant collapsed to the deck, unconscious. Naruto straightened up, dusting off his hands. He had neutralized the entire leadership, defeated an army, and routed a New World pirate fleet, all while barely breaking a sweat. But he had done it as a king. He had led his men, used strategy, and had only entered the fray to deliver the final, decisive blow. He had proven that Alabasta's strength was not just him, it was its people, led by him. As the Alabastan forces began boarding the disorganized pirate ships, accepting their surrenders, Naruto returned to the palace. The victory was absolute. But his mind was already elsewhere. Back in the quiet solitude of Cobra's study, which had been left untouched since his death, Naruto felt a pull. He had ordered it sealed, but now he needed to go back. He needed to look again. He entered the room, the scent of old books and his father-in-law's pipe tobacco still lingering in the air. He walked to the desk. His sage senses were still active, and he cast them out, not looking for life, but for secrets. He ran his hands over the desk, the shelves, the walls. He was looking for something out of place, a hidden compartment, anything. His fingers brushed against the spine of a particular book on the shelf behind the desk. It was an old, leather-bound history of the Nefertari dynasty. As his fingers touched it, he felt a flicker. A tiny, almost imperceptible trace of the same unnatural energy he had sensed on the night of the murder. His eyes narrowed. He pulled the book from the shelf. It was heavy. He opened it, and found that the first 100 pages were normal. But then he found it. The rest of the book had been hollowed out, creating a secret compartment. Inside lay another, much smaller journal, bound in dark blue leather. He opened it. It was his father-in-law's private journal. The last few entries were written in a shaky, hurried hand. "The Guardian's power grows, and so does my fear. Not of him, his heart is true gold, but of what his presence is awakening. The old stories are true. The priests called it soul, the sun god. A gift, they said, that became a curse. Our ancestors made a pact with the founders of the world government to seal it away, to contain its power which was scorching our land into a desert. This was the true reason Alabasta did not ascend to the Holy Land. We were made the eternal wardens of this prison. A secret we have kept for 800 years. Naruto's blood ran cold. Soul. The being from the mural. An ancient weapon. He read the final entry, dated the day before Cobra's death. They know. The government knows the seal is weakening. I was contacted today by an agent of their most secret branch, Cipher Pol Aegis 0. A woman who called herself Strix. She warned me that Naruto's energy is acting as a catalyst. She offered a solution, their help in reinforcing the seal, in exchange for complete control over our kingdom's secrets. I refused. I will not trade one master for another. I fear I have made a fatal mistake. I must warn Naruto. I must tell him everything. The journal ended there. Naruto closed the book, his knuckles white. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Strix. The assassin from the arena. The faint energy he had sensed on Cobra's body, it was hers. Cobra hadn't died from his failing health. He had been silenced. Murdered by a secret agent of the world government to keep him from revealing the truth. He stood in the silent study, the journal in his hand, a cold, hard fury solidifying in his heart. He had won the battle, but he was only just beginning to understand the true nature of the war. His enemy wasn't just a pirate or a vice-admiral. It was the entire rotten structure of the world government and its dark, centuries-old secrets. And they had murdered his family. He was no longer just a guardian protecting a kingdom. He was a king seeking justice. And he would tear the world apart to get it. Chapter 7, God-Slayers at the Gates of Dawn. The discovery of Cobra's journal changed everything. The Cold War of whispers and political maneuvering was over. For Naruto, the fight had become brutally, irrevocably personal. He shared the journal with Vivi in the privacy of their chambers, and watched as her grief was forged into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. Her father hadn't just passed away, he had been executed for defying the world government, for protecting his kingdom's secrets and its new guardian. There was no time to mourn this new, sharper loss. The journal was a death warrant, not just for its author, but for anyone who knew its contents. Soul, the sun god, the living ancient weapon sealed beneath their feet. Cipher Pol Aegis 0, the ghost-like assassins who served the five elders directly. Strix, the killer who had twice been a breath away from Naruto. The truth was a crushing weight. They didn't just kill him to silence him, Vivi said, her voice devoid of tears, replaced by a chilling clarity. They killed him to remove an obstacle. He would have told you. He would have prepared you. Now they think we're blind. They're wrong, Naruto said, his hand closing over hers. His six paths energy flared for a moment, a golden aura of controlled rage. They wanted a war. Now they have one. He didn't wait for them to make the next move. He began to prepare. He blanketed Alabasta with a network of hundreds of sensory-type clones, hidden on rooftops, in alleyways, disguised as merchants and beggars. They were his early warning system, a web of consciousness that monitored every street and shadow. He was turning the entire capital into an extension of his own senses. He would not be caught by surprise again. The attack came 3 nights later, not with a bang, but with a whisper. It was just after midnight. The city was asleep, bathed in the cool, silvery light of the twin moons. Naruto and Vivi were in the war room, poring over ancient maps of the palace catacombs, trying to pinpoint the location of Soul's containment chamber. Suddenly, Naruto went rigid. "They're here," he said, his voice a low growl. His sensory network lit up like a supernova. Not with one assassin, but with a dozen. They hadn't entered the city. They had simply materializing from the shadows at 12 distinct points on the palace's outer wall, bypassing the city's defenses entirely. They moved with a synchronized, preternatural grace that spoke of years of training together. They were a single, deadly organism. And their energy signatures, they were bizarre. Each one was a void, a blank spot in his perception, their life forces deliberately and artificially suppressed. But around that void, he could feel a strange, dissonant hum. It was the energy of their weapons, their technology. Each one was specifically tuned, specifically designed. "Vivi, get to the royal bunker," Naruto ordered, his voice sharp with command. "Take Pell and Shaka. Seal the entrance. Do not open it until I come for you." "I'm not leaving you," she protested, her hand flying to the small, ornate dagger she now wore at her belt. "This isn't a debate," he snapped, his eyes flashing with golden light. "Your father died to protect this kingdom's secrets. Your duty is to survive and carry that knowledge. My duty is to make sure you can. Go. Now." He didn't wait for her reply. He vanished from the war room in a golden flicker, reappearing on the highest spire of the palace. Below him, the 12 figures were already moving, converging on the palace's central keep from all sides. They were a coordinated infiltration team, moving with terrifying speed and silence. He saw her then. Strix. She was at their head, her familiar cloak now discarded for a tight-fitting, matte black combat suit that seemed to drink the moonlight. Her face was finally visible, sharp and angular, framed by short, silver hair, her expression one of utter, professional detachment. She carried no visible weapons, but her hands glowed with a faint, cold blue light. The other 11 were just as strange. One was a massive, brutish man whose arms were replaced with bulky, piston-driven gauntlets. Another was a lithe woman who seemed to phase in and out of sight, her body flickering like a faulty light. A third was surrounded by 4 floating metallic spheres that hummed with energy. They were not a simple assassination squad. They were a unit of specialists. Godslayers. Naruto didn't announce his presence. He simply acted. He dropped from the spire, a silent meteor aimed directly at Strix. He would end this with the head of the snake. He was halfway down when the 4 floating spheres swiveled in unison, firing beams of crackling purple energy that converged on his position. He twisted in mid-air, the beams searing the air where he had been. He hadn't been detected by sight or sound. They had a sensor that could track his energy signature. He landed in the central courtyard, kicking up a cloud of dust. The 12 agents took their positions, surrounding him in a perfect circle. They didn't speak. They just watched him, their stances ready, their strange technologies humming. "Strix," Naruto said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of deadly promise. "You murdered King Cobra." Strix's expression didn't change. "He was a compromised asset who refused to cooperate," she replied, her voice a cold, toneless monotone. It was the voice from his memory, the one that whispered to celestial command. His removal was a matter of operational security. Just as your removal is now. "You came here to kill me and the Queen," Naruto stated. "The Queen is a target of opportunity," Strix corrected him. "Our primary objective is more complex. We are here to initiate a controlled release of subject soul. Your unpredictable energy is destabilizing the primary containment field. A full, uncontrolled breach is imminent. We are here to prevent that catastrophe by triggering it on our own terms, allowing us to deploy the Archon array to recontain and harness it." Naruto's eyes narrowed. They weren't just here to kill him. They were here to steal a god. "You'll fail," he said. Strix tilted her head, a flicker of something almost like curiosity in her cold eyes. "Our analysis indicates a 97.4% probability of success. Our abilities are specifically designed to counter high-level energy manipulators and reality warpers. You are powerful, Kitsune. But you are a singular, chaotic force. We are a system. We are order. And order always prevails." She made a subtle hand gesture. The attack was instantaneous and perfectly coordinated. The hulking man with the piston arms, Juggernaut, slammed his gauntlets together, unleashing a concussive shockwave that shattered the stone courtyard. Simultaneously, the phasing woman, Wraith, flickered behind Naruto, a blade of pure, hard light materializing in her hand, aimed at his spine. From above, the sphere wielder, Technomancer, launched his drones, which fired a net of binding energy. It was an impossible assault, designed to overwhelm and incapacitate in a single second. But Naruto was the master of sensing killing intent. He was already moving before they were. He didn't dodge. He went on the offensive. He stomped his foot, unleashing a counter-shock wave of sage energy that met Juggernaut's blast head-on, neutralizing it in a wave of displaced air. He didn't turn to face Wraith. He simply thrust an elbow backward, a frog Kumite strike of invisible force that caught her in the chest as she materialized, sending her flying back with a choked gasp, her light blade flickering out. He raised a hand, and a single truth-seeking orb shot up, transforming into a shield that absorbed the energy net without effect. The first exchange was over in a heartbeat. The combined, perfect attack of three specialists had been utterly defeated by three simple, contemptuously easy movements. A flicker of shock finally registered on the faces of some of the agents. Their data had been wrong. "My turn," Naruto said. He created 24 clones in a smokeless puff. They shot out in every direction, each one engaging a different agent. The courtyard erupted into a chaotic, multi-front battle. It was a whirlwind of bizarre technologies clashing with the raw, unpredictable power of sage art. One clone, fighting a man who could manipulate gravity, found itself crushed to the ground, only to dissolve and be replaced by another that attacked from below, using a Rasengan to shatter the agent's gravitational anchor. Another clone battled an agent who fired projectiles that aged whatever they touched, turning stone to dust in seconds. The clone was hit and crumbled into an ancient, decrepit version of itself, but two more were already there, using taijutsu to force the agent onto the defensive. Naruto himself ignored the chaos. His eyes were locked on Strix. He moved toward her, walking through the maelstrom of battle as if it were a light rain. Strix watched him come, her expression finally hardening. She raised her hands, the blue light around them intensifying. "Your power is chaotic. You bleed energy into the world with every move. You are a cancer. The world requires precision. It requires balance. The world requires freedom," Naruto countered, his voice low. "Something you and your masters are afraid of." She lunged, her movements impossibly fast. She didn't use Soru. It was some kind of personal propulsion system built into her suit. Her hands, glowing with the blue energy of her scalpel fields, were not meant for punching. She swiped at him, and he felt a sharp, cutting sensation against his chakra, as if she were trying to surgically sever his connection to his own power. It was a more refined, more dangerous version of Kaido's seafoam blade. They engaged in a taijutsu battle of breathtaking speed and skill. He was all fluid power and overwhelming force. She was all precise angles and surgical strikes. Her every blow was aimed not at his body, but at the tenketsu points of his chakra network, her energy scalpels attempting to disable him from the inside out. But she was fighting the man with the single greatest life force on the planet. For every point she managed to disrupt, his Uzumaki healing factor and the massive reserves of the Nine Tails sealed it instantly. He was a force of nature that simply could not be disabled. "It's useless, Strix," he said, catching her wrist in an iron grip. "You can't cut what you can't comprehend." He spun, throwing her across the courtyard. She landed gracefully, her propulsion suit absorbing the impact. But as she looked up, she saw Naruto standing with his hand raised, a spinning vortex of wind forming in his palm, growing larger and more violent by the second. A Rasen Shuriken. Its shriek was a death sentence. "You believe in order," Naruto said, the wind whipping around him. "Let me show you what true chaos feels like." Strix's eyes widened. Her sensors were screaming. The energy output from the attack was off the scale. It was enough to vaporize the entire palace. This was it. The culmination of his chaotic power. But as he was about to throw it, a massive tremor shook the very foundations of the palace. A deep, resonant groan echoed up from the ground beneath them, a sound of stone grinding against stone that was felt in the bones. A wave of pure, raw, thermal energy washed over the courtyard, so intense that the air itself seemed to shimmer. Cracks, glowing with a fierce, orange light, spiderwebbed across the courtyard floor. The collateral damage from their battle, the shock waves from Juggernaut, the gravitational pulses, the dozens of exploding clones, had been the final straw. The ancient, weakening seal deep below had finally, catastrophically failed. The raisin shuriken in Naruto's hand dissipated, his attention snapping to the ground beneath his feet. He could feel it. A consciousness, ancient, vast, and in immense pain, was stirring from its millennia-long slumber. Soul was waking up. Strix's cold composure broke into a triumphant, fanatic smile. Too late, Kitsune, she hissed. Phase 2 is complete. The seal is broken. She pressed a button on her wrist communicator. All units, fall back to the Archon array. The reclamation has begun. The surviving CP-A0 agents disengaged from their battles with Naruto's clones, their forms blurring as their propulsion systems carried them up and away, retreating to the city's perimeter. A colossal beam of golden light erupted from the center of the courtyard, shooting straight up into the night sky. It was not a beam of destruction. It was a pillar of pure, unfiltered life energy and heat, a physical manifestation of an awakening god. The very air began to superheat. The stone of the palace glowed red. From her vantage point on a distant building, Strix watched, her team assembling around her. The subject is venting primordial energy, she reported into her comm, it's disoriented, lashing out. Just as the simulations predicted. Prepare to deploy the Archon array. We will cage the storm. From 12 points around Alabasta, massive, hidden pylons rose from the ground, humming with a cold, blue power. They began to project a shimmering barrier of energy over the city, a dome designed to contain the raging god. Back in the palace, the pillar of light began to coalesce. It took on a form, a being of pure, stellar plasma, a vaguely humanoid shape on a scale that defied comprehension. It had no face, only a burning, white-hot core where its heart would be. It let out a silent scream, a wave of psychic agony and confusion that washed over Naruto, a being that had been asleep for 800 years, suddenly and violently awakened. It lashed out blindly. A wave of fire, a miniature solar flare, erupted from its body, washing across the palace. Naruto reacted instantly. He slammed his hands on the ground. Sage art, wood style, wooden wall jutsu. A massive, domed wall of interconnected wood pillars erupted from the ground, shielding the section of the palace that housed the royal bunker where Vivi was hidden. The solar flare crashed against the wood, which sizzled and burned but held firm. Naruto stood before the raging god, the heat so intense it should have incinerated him. His 6. Path Sage mode protected him, the truth-seeking orbs swirling around him like guardian planets. He could feel its power. It was immense, easily on par with the Ten Tails, but it was unfocused, wild, a force of nature without a mind to guide it. He could fight it. He could probably even destroy it, a battle that would undoubtedly wipe Alabasta off the map. But as he felt its psychic scream, he didn't feel a monster's rage. He felt the pain and terror of a caged animal, suddenly freed into a world it didn't understand. Destruction was not the answer. That was Sasuke's way. That was Madara's way. It was not his. Strix thinks she can put you in another cage, Naruto said, his voice not projected by shouting, but by infusing his own calm, resolute will into the turbulent psychic energies. I'm not going to let that happen. He rose into the air, floating toward the colossal, raging entity of light. His own golden aura flared, not in aggression, but in empathy. He didn't prepare a weapon. He spread his arms wide, a gesture of complete openness, of complete vulnerability. Strix, watching through her binoculars, gasped. What is he doing? Is he surrendering to it? Naruto flew to the very heart of the storm, to the white-hot core of the sun god. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his hands, but with his very soul. He used the fundamental power of the Sage of Six Paths, the creation of all things, the ability to create form from nothingness and breathe life into it. But he used it in reverse. He wasn't trying to create. He was trying to understand. He pushed his consciousness into souls, and was met with a tidal wave of pure, agonizing sensation. 800 years of silent, dreamless sleep, shattered into a violent awakening. He felt its confusion, its loneliness, its terror. It was not a weapon. It was a living being, a creature of energy that had once lived in harmony with this world before it was attacked, captured, and imprisoned. Who are you? The question was not in words, but in a wave of pure thought, directed at the tiny, golden fleck of a being that had dared to enter its heart. Another jailer? I'm a friend, Naruto sent back, his own thoughts a beacon of calm in the storm. I was a prisoner once, too. I know what it's like. He showed it. He didn't just tell it. He opened his own heart, his own memories. He showed Soul the image of a lonely, hated little boy on a swing set. He showed it the pain of being feared for the power locked inside him. He showed it the rage, the sorrow, and the fierce, desperate struggle for acknowledgement. He showed it the face of the nine-tailed fox, Kurama, another being of pure energy, caged, hated, and weaponized for generations, until one person, one friend, finally reached out and offered not a chain, but a hand. The raging stellar energy around him began to calm. The psychic screaming subsided into a low, inquisitive hum. Soul felt the truth in Naruto's memories. It felt the shared experience, the impossible empathy of this tiny, mortal being. You are like me, Soul projected, the thought filled with a dawning wonder. We are now, Naruto replied. They want to put you back in a cage. But I have a better idea. You don't have to be a prisoner. And you don't have to be a weapon. You can be a guardian. Just like me. He opened his eyes. He was floating in the heart of a now calm, brilliant sun. He reached out his hand. Lend me your power, Naruto requested. Not as a master to a slave, but as a partner. Let's show them what we can build. Together. The colossal being of light considered this. Then, slowly, it began to shrink, to condense, its unfathomable power flowing not into a destructive blast, but into Naruto's outstretched hand. The world outside held its breath. The terrifying, raging god had gone silent. The pillar of light was receding. Strix stared, her mind unable to process what was happening. It's being absorbed. He's absorbing it. But Naruto wasn't absorbing it. He was guiding it. Chapter 8, A New Dawn for a Desert Kingdom. The light did not vanish. It changed. The raw, violent energy of the awakening god, a force that had threatened to atomize the entire kingdom, was now flowing into Naruto like a river into the sea. He wasn't containing it, he was communing with it. The golden aura of his six paths sage mode burned brighter than 1,000 suns, no longer just his own power but now amplified, harmonized with the ancient, stellar might of Soul. From her command post on the edge of the city, Strix watched in horrified disbelief. All her data, all her simulations, had accounted for two outcomes, Naruto being destroyed by Soul, or Naruto destroying Soul. This third option, friendship, was a variable so far outside the realm of her cold, logical world that it might as well have been magic. He's not absorbing it, her technomancer specialist whispered, his own sensors going haywire. He's resonating with it. They've synced their energy frequencies. It's impossible. It's like a man shaking hands with a star. Break the harmony. Strix commanded, her voice regaining its sharp edge. Fire the Archon array. Full power. Cage them both. Ma'am, the energy levels are too high, the technician stammered. If we fire now, the feedback loop could overload the pylons and vaporize a quarter of the country. That is an acceptable loss. Strix snarled. Fire. The 12 massive pylons surrounding Alabasta whined, the cold blue light intensifying as they prepared to unleash their cage of absolute containment. In the heart of the palace, floating in a sea of now benevolent golden light, Naruto felt the shift. He felt the cold, oppressive energy of the Archon array gathering, a net preparing to fall. They still want to chain you, he projected to Soul, his new partner. They have tried before, Soul replied, its voice a symphony of starlight and ancient wisdom. They are small. They think in terms of cages. Let's show them what we can do without one, Naruto said, a fierce, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He didn't need to give a command. Their wills were aligned. He raised his hands, and the entirety of Soul's remaining power, a torrent of pure creation, flowed through him. It was not a weapon to be aimed. It was a tool to be wielded. He directed the energy downward, not as a blast, but as a wave. It poured into the cracked and burning earth of Alabasta, a life-giving flood of energy that went deeper than the bedrock. It was the fundamental energy of life, the same power the Sage of Six Paths used to create the tailed beasts, now guided by Naruto's will and amplified by a star. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The endless, rolling dunes of the desert, which had defined Alabasta for 8 centuries, began to recede. The pale, dead sand darkened, turning into rich, fertile soil before the eyes of a stunned populace. From that new soil, things began to grow. Not slowly, but with explosive, time-lapsed speed. Hardy desert grasses sprouted first, followed by vibrant wildflowers, their colors a riot against the new brown earth. Then came shrubs, and then trees, their roots digging deep, their leaves unfurling to a sky that had only ever known sand. Great rivers, long since dried into dusty canyons, began to flow again, not with trickles, but with roaring, healthy currents, fed by ancient aquifers that were revitalized and refilled by the surge of life energy. Oases that had been shrinking for generations expanded into vast, clear lakes. The drought, the curse that had defined their existence, was not just broken, it was erased from history. The wave of life expanded outward from Alabasta at incredible speed, a ripple of green washing over the golden landscape. In minutes, years of desertification were undone. Alabasta was being reborn, returned to the lush, green paradise it had been in the age of myth. The people, who had run from their homes in terror at the sight of the light pillar, now stood in the streets, their faces wet with tears, their feet standing not on sand or stone, but on soft, green grass. They watched as their desert kingdom transformed into a verdant garden. It was a miracle that dwarfed even the coming of the rain. On the city's edge, Strix and her team could only stare in abject failure. Report, Strix whispered into her calm, her voice hollow. Primary objective, failed. Subject Soul has, bonded with Kitsune. The Archon array is obsolete. They have terraformed the entire nation. The silent, terrifying response from the Gorosei came a moment later. It was not a question or a reprimand. It was a single, cold, absolute order, retreat. The word was an admission of defeat on a scale the world government had not experienced in centuries. They could not fight this. To attack Alabasta now would be to declare war on a nation that possessed a willing, friendly ancient weapon, guided by a man who could wield its power to create life on a continental scale. They had tried to cage a god and had instead created a utopia ruled by their greatest enemy. Strix lowered her hand, her face a blank mask that concealed a universe of shattered certainties. Her entire life had been dedicated to the preservation of order through control, through the elimination of chaotic variables. And she had just witnessed that same chaos produce a miracle of life she couldn't have accomplished with all the technology and power in the world. Without another word, she and her team vanished, ghosts retreating from a dawn they had no power to prevent. As the last of Soul's transformative energy flowed into the land, the brilliant light in the palace courtyard began to fade. Naruto floated gently back to the ground, landing in the center of what was no longer a cracked stone courtyard, but a lush, grassy circle filled with blooming night flowers. He was not alone. Hovering just before him was a small, incandescent sphere of golden light, about the size of a raisin-gan. It hummed with a friendly, intelligent energy. It was the core of Soul, its consciousness, now condensed into a manageable, companionable form. "It is done," Soul projected into his mind. "The land breathes again." "We did it, partner," Naruto said aloud, grinning at the ball of light. He felt a surge of movement behind him. The massive wooden dome he had created cracked open, and Vivi ran out, followed by Pell and Shaka. She stopped dead, her eyes taking in the impossible sight, the grassy courtyard, the flowers, Naruto standing unharmed, and the small, floating star beside him. "Naruto," she breathed, her voice filled with awe and confusion. He turned to her, his smile gentle. "It's okay," he said. "The monster wasn't a monster after all. Meet Soul. He's a friend." The little starball pulsed with a warm light, a silent greeting. Vivi slowly approached, her hand outstretched, not in fear, but in wonder. She looked from Naruto to Soul and back again, tears welling in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, incomprehensible joy. She saw the truth in that moment. He hadn't just defeated another enemy. He had done what he always did. He had understood his enemy's pain and turned them into a friend. He hadn't just saved them. He had healed them, land and soul. She closed the distance between them and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest, holding on as if she'd never let go. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, the little sunball bobbing happily beside them. The new dawn that broke over Alabasta was unlike any in its history. The sun rose not over a kingdom of gold and white, but over a realm of emerald green and sapphire blue. The air was cool and sweet with the scent of wet earth and blossoms. The world had been remade. King Naruto and Queen Vivi stood on the grand balcony of the palace, their hands clasped together, Soul hovering playfully around them like an exotic pet. They looked out over their new kingdom, a paradise born from conflict and understanding. The news of Alabasta's transformation spread across the world like a shockwave, accompanied by Viva cards and news coups carrying impossible photographs of a green desert. The world government remained utterly silent, issuing no statements, no explanations. Their silence was more telling than any threat. It was the silence of fear. They had lost control. Alabasta was now a global superpower, not through military might, but through the promise of life itself. A kingdom that held the cure to drought, ruled by a queen with the love of her people and a king with the power of a god and the friendship of another. Their fight was far from over. The five elders and their secret war would continue. New enemies, drawn by the allure of such power, would inevitably rise. The world was still a place of pirates and corruption, of secrets and lies. But as Naruto looked at Vivi, at the strength and hope shining in her eyes, he knew they would face it all. He had fallen into this world, lost and alone, a hero without a home. Now, he was a king with a queen, a man with a family, a guardian with a nation to protect and a world to change. He had found his new purpose, his new dream. It wasn't about being acknowledged anymore. It was about building a world where his family, his people, could live free and safe under a peaceful sky. He squeezed Vivi's hand, a silent promise passing between them. Their kingdom was secure. Their love was their foundation. The sun had risen on a new day. And their adventure was just beginning. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.